tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the size. Whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect, you do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. Gonna tell you the
Hello and welcome back to Cypherfics, guys. We are happy to have you back with us today in part 11 of What If Harry Potter Meets the Power Rangers. Make sure to like, share, subscribe and also press the bell icon so that you never miss a great update. Also make sure to check out the wonderful author 10star12 on fanfiction.net. Well, let's continue with the story now.
Over the next 30 minutes, the Rangers each tried to cope with their nerves in their own ways. Initially, Harry and Trini has spent some time together, all but cuddling on a conjured bench until Kimberly's fretting and pacing forced Trini away to try and calm her friend. Billy continued poring over calculations with Alpha and seemed completely unaffected, but occasional tense glances at one of the other Rangers was enough to reveal his true state. Zach and Jason had broken into some light sparring off in one corner, trying to work off their nerves through exertion. Finally, Billy broke the silence as he smiled and began pressing what looked to be a completely random sequence of buttons to Harry. "I've got it, guys. I know how we can reach Tommy." Kimberly was at his side almost before Harry could blink, peering at the computer console Billy had been working at only to be completely stymied by the advanced technology. Giving up on deciphering it herself, she asked the resident brain. "What is it, Billy?" Pressing a final button, the command center was briefly lit up by the light of teleportation before two identical devices faded into view. The main body of them was a rod about 4 feet long with a spike on the bottom. At the top of this rod, the devices split into 3 prongs, the outer 2 looking like silver pipes with 5 rings spaced along them extending up and out another 3 feet and the center one with a short antenna sticking out the top. At the junction, each device had what looked like a pinwheel, spinning constantly while lights at the tops of each pipe blinked. "I've been working on these molecular decoders for some time, ever since Harry was kidnapped by the Twin Man to be exact," Billy explained. "I was performing some research and experimentation on the feasibility of long-distance transportation through the exploitation of naturally occurring transdimensional folds in hopes of circumventing known deterrents to existing teleportation technology. My biggest complication has been that I have only been able to open dimensional doorways, but not create conduits back into our own dimension to be used to facilitate the travel. However, I feel that these results could be most beneficial in resolving our current dilemma." Harry was not alone in staring blankly at Billy as the Blue Ranger tweaked the devices, a satisfied smile on his face. Even Trini, usually the first one to turn to when a Billy translation was needed, looked rather dumbfounded. Finally, Zach walked up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Billy, you know we love you, man, but what?" It was Zordon that answered. He had hoped to create an alternative to teleportation with these devices, likely a method that wouldn't be protected against by Rita's spells. Instead, he found a way to open gateways into other dimensions. I presume this means that his molecular decoders can open a doorway to Rita's dark dimension if given the right input. If you were to take them to the park where Tommy was taken, there could be enough of a trace left to set the devices properly. Billy blinked confusedly. "Affirmative, but isn't that what I just said?" Billy's question remained unanswered. "Now the only thing left to figure out," Jason started, "is who we're going to send in after Tommy." "I'll go." Kimberly spoke up immediately. "He was helping me when he got caught. It's only right that I go in after him now." "No, Kim." Jason responded just as quickly. "I should be the one to do it. You haven't been to the dark dimension before. It's not an easy place to get used to." Somehow Harry wasn't surprised that Jason, the one who brought up the topic in the first place, was so ready to argue for his own direct involvement. "I'm afraid that you cannot go either, Jason," Zordon interjected. "What?" The Red Ranger looked truly befuddled as he turned to face Zordon. "Why not, Zordon?" "Because we need the 5 of you here in case the rescue is not successful before Rita's palace arrives and Cyclopsis is unleashed," came the response, making Harry close his eyes, expecting what was to come. The Megazord will be needed to battle against Cyclopsis, which means that Harry is the only real option to rescue Tommy. While Hedwig may be able to fight on her own, the Megazord is more suitable for battling Cyclopsis. Like you, Jason, Harry has been to the Dark Dimension, and while you may be a better fighter, Harry's magic gives him an edge that is harder to defend against. Trini's grip on Harry's hand tightened as she spoke. "But Zordon, didn't you say that Rita might have been trying to capture Harry in the first place? Wouldn't sending him just be playing into her hands?" "It is entirely possible, Trini, however I feel that sending Harry may be our only real choice. As long as the dimensional gateway stays open and Harry stays vigilant, Alpha will be able to contact him and teleport him out should something go wrong." Harry squeezed Trini's hand, drawing her attention to him. "Hey, I'll be alright. Zordon has a point about you guys sticking together. We need to do what's best for the city. I'll be back with Tommy before you know it. Zack spoke next, nearly dancing in place as his excitement for the impending battle grew. If our communicators and the teleporters still work while Billy's gateway is open, why don't we just send in more than one? Heck, why not the whole team? Then, if Cyclopsis shows up, we can teleport back out to fight him. Billy cut in before Zordon could respond. Actually, that won't be possible, Zack. The molecular decoders are still experimental and aren't quite capable of handling more than 2 people passing through within a short time PRD. If we have more people go through, it's highly likely that they will overload and trap the travelers between dimensions. Kimberly sighed. And we can't send anyone with Harry because the second-person slot will be taken up by Tommy on the way back, right? Billy nodded in response before continuing. Affirmative. In addition, whoever goes through can't be morphed at the time. The dramatic increase in our energy signatures while we're morphed would have a similar effect on the decoders as having too many people going through. Harry blinked as this new piece of news set in and Zordon began speaking. Which brings us back to Harry's magic giving him a decided advantage over any opponent he may face. Seeing everyone looking at him now, Harry nodded firmly. Well then, I guess there's no point in discussing this further, is there? With hope to reach Tommy and a plan to work with, it didn't take long for the Rangers to teleport back to the site of the Power Ranger Day celebration. Upon arrival, Billy, coordinating with Alpha, located the exact position that the putties had teleported out with Tommy and directed Zack and Trini to position the molecular decoders while he tweaked their controls. It shouldn't take more than a few more minutes to get everything aligned, Billy said, tilting the antenna on one decoder before checking it and then adjusting it slightly. Once they're aligned, we'll just have to activate them and the gateway to the dark dimension will be open. And then Harry will go through, grab Tommy, and get back here in time for tea. Zack said with a smirk. Harry just rolled his eyes, resisting the urge to send a stinging hex at Zack's backside. Only the fact that Zack was currently holding a rather delicate piece of technology that was rather important to their current goals really prevented it. It was indeed only a few minutes later that Billy directed Zack and Trini to, carefully, drive the spikes at the bottom of the decoders into the ground. Once they were freestanding, Billy made a few more adjustments, turning the poles or tweaking the antenna a bit, before declaring them to be ready. Harry took a deep breath and let it out slowly, fighting down his nerves even as Billy nodded to Trini and flipped to SWCH on the first decoder. Molecular decoder number 1, activated. From atop the antenna, electricity began crackling into the open air. Trini nodded back and, after glancing down to make sure she was flipping the proper SWCH, turned hers on. Decoder number 2, activated. When her decoder started sparking with electricity, the energy seemed to reach out to that coming from Billy's. When they met in the middle, the energy started to swirl around itself before forming into a deep blue-colored vortex floating in midair with electricity dancing around the edges. "All right, Harry," Jason said with a nod of his own and his familiar serious look on his face. "It's all you." Harry drew his coin and shifted it to wand form and stepped toward the swirling portal between the two poles. Before he could reach it, however, Trini all but crashed into his side, standing on tiptoe and planting a soft kiss on his cheek. "For luck, be careful, Harry." Harry smiled at her, doing his best to keep his own nerves from showing. "No worries, Trini. I'll be back before you know it." And with that, Harry stepped through the portal. Harry's first reaction upon entering the portal was to wince slightly. The air around him was as supercharged as one might expect from a portal that had appeared to be formed from electricity, resulting in a tingle that constantly danced over his entire body in a non-stop sensation. The second thing he noticed was the incredible feeling of speed as he was pushed through the interdimensional tunnel toward Rita's dark dimension prison. Finally, Harry saw a proverbial light at the end of the tunnel as the vaguely familiar bars and columns over a black starry background came into view through what he could only describe as a hole in the air. Harry tightened his grip on his wand as the exit rocketed ever closer only to find himself coming to a sudden and completely unexpected halt mere inches from it. Since he had been leaning forward slightly in anticipation the sudden stop, even though he hadn't physically been moving, threw him off, making him panic a bit and flail enough to stumble forward, so his entrance into the dark dimension was more of a stumbleflop that ended up with him lying face down on the ground and hidden in the fog. And unfortunately not as completely unnoticed as he would have liked. "Maggling! How did you get here?" "CRP," Harry cursed before springing to his feet, his wand whipping around to find Golder. The monster was standing across the 30-foot area with Tommy standing nearby. It appeared that Harry had shown up in the middle of a fight between the two, something that the unmorphed ranger had been coming out on the worse side of based on his torn clothing, visible bruises, and panting, though not too bad off. Golder himself wasn't exactly untouched, but Harry knew that it was more than likely that the scorch marks and pits on his armor along with the only partially healed damage to his face was probably the remnants of his own meeting with the Magi Ranger when Tommy was first kidnapped. "Harry?" Tommy shouted, moving away from Golder and toward his fellow ranger in a stumbling gait, showing that he was perhaps a bit more injured than first glance suggested. "Yeah, one rescue party at your service," Harry replied with a smirk, his wand never leaving Golder even as Tommy neared him. "Harry, he's got my morpher, and that's not all. We have to get that candle behind him." Harry raised an eyebrow in confusion, but nodded all the same. It wasn't really in Tommy's character to joke at a time like this, but a candle of all things? Still, questions were better saved for later when they weren't in imminent danger, so he'd just have to take Tommy's word for it. "All right then, beat Golder, get back your morpher, get the candle he's guarding, and get out of here. Let's make it happen." Without another word and once more preventing Golder from starting his pre-fight banter, Harry led off with a cutting curse, forcing the monster to dodge out of the way, opening the candle in question to Harry's view. It was a fairly normal-looking green candle at first glance, if a bit on the tall side. It stood nearly a foot tall and several inches wide, the flame at the top burning merrily and letting out the occasional bright green mote of light that drifted upward instead of falling down like one would expect. After a few moments, the lights would vanish, though Harry got the impression that they weren't just odd sparks burning out. Putting these candle-based thoughts aside, and how odd was it that he was having them in the first place? Harry tracked Golder's movement with his wand, casting the same chains of devastating spells as earlier to keep the monster dodging and defending so as to better protect himself and his injured teammate. After several volleys, Harry took a chance and mixed a conjuration into his spell chain, creating a pair of pythons hidden amongst the fog. It slowed his onslaught a bit, but not enough for Golder to do more than regain his feet. After a softly hissed command, more than hidden by Golder's grunts and roars as the monster tried to avoid Harry's attack, the snakes slithered off toward Golder, who quickly noticed their presence when they latched onto his legs and tripped him up. Once the monster was down, they began restraining him as quickly as they could. "What? Where did these snakes come from?" Golder roared as he struggled against the reptiles. Harry took his chance and snapped off a silent disarming charm, only to once again realize the folly in casting such a spell when one's opponent is holding a sword. Harry hit the ground, pulling Tommy down with him and letting the sword clatter against the wall behind them. "You all right?" Harry asked, helping Tommy back up again and snapping off a few general healing spells now that he wasn't occupied with Golder. "I'll live," Tommy grunted, straightening slightly as Harry's magic did its work. "Did you see my morpher?" Harry hummed slightly before casting a summoning charm and snagging the flying morpher out of the air and passing it back to Tommy. "Now, let's see about this candle, shall we?" As the two rangers stepped closer to the green candle, Golder redoubled his struggling. "No! You shall not ruin my Empress's plans. Not this time. Putties, to me." With a flash of light, a half-dozen putties appeared in the dark dimension, their high-pitched mumbling noises echoing around. "Great," Harry sighed, turning to face the constructs with Tommy at his side. "As if we hadn't gotten enough of these guys already today." Before Tommy could respond, 4 of the 6 putties charged the 2, one of them falling to a reducto from Harry on the way, before engaging them in close combat. Harry was forced to dodge away from Tommy to avoid running into him, pulling 2 of the 3 remaining combatants with him as he did. Sneering slightly as he got a bit of room, Harry lashed out at the nearest putty with a quick, off-handed punch, only for it to dodge the attack and for its comrade to land a kick to Harry's midsection, dropping him to the ground. "Oh no," Harry growled as the 2 putties prepared to pummel him. "I'm not doing this again." With a quick heave and a pulse of power, Harry launched himself off the ground and over the putties' heads. While the dim-witted clay constructs stared in what he could only assume to be surprise, Harry flipped through the air, his feet barely scraping the ceiling as he did, and landed behind them, lashing out with his elbows and smashing each putty to the ground where he finished them with another pair of blasting curses. With a quick glance, Harry was able to see that Tommy had dealt with his opponent with his usual efficiency, but Golder's voice drew his attention back to the green candle. "You may have freed your comrade, Magling, but you will not have the green candle this day." The sword arms of the 2 putties standing next to him explained how Golder had gotten free from Harry's serpentine restraints, but the panic on Tommy's face at seeing Golder with candle in hand only caused confusion. What was so bad about Golder having that candle exactly? Before Harry could voice this question, Golder, and the candle, vanished in a flash of light, his last words and dark laughter echoing around the dark dimension. Another time, Magling and Green Ranger for now. Tommy seemed to slump a bit in resignation before turning to face Harry. "Hey, thanks for the rescue, man. I owe you one." Harry smiled, though still slightly confused at Tommy's reaction. Not a problem, Tommy, glad to be of service. But what was the deal with the candle? Tommy just sighed. I'll tell you once we get back to the others. I don't want to have to go over this more than once. You do have a way back, don't you? Harry just nodded and gestured to the still swirling portal, though its dark coloration made it a bit harder to notice in the dark dimension, which explained how Tommy had missed it in the first place. Come on then, Harry said, leading his teammate toward their escape route. Let's get you back home. Kimberly has been driving herself crazy. The candle does what? Harry and Tommy's return had been met with a great deal of happiness from their fellow Rangers, especially Kimberly for obvious reasons. Once Billy had deactivated and collected his molecular decoders, the group teleported back to the command center both to hear Tommy's story and to wait for Rita's arrival in Angel Grove. Tommy had then explained to them that, when he arrived in the dark dimension, Golder and Rita had been there to meet him. As Tommy was still being restrained by putties, Golder had stolen his morpher from him easily. Tommy's hand was then forced into a bowl of wax that Rita magically fashioned into a candle that was then lit. It was only when Rita left Golder to toy with him that Tommy learned what the purpose of the candle was. How Rita had used a magic ritual to link the wax to the first person who touched it. How the candle that was fashioned would drain the power from anyone linked to it. How when the candle burned out, Tommy's powers, and the Green Ranger, would be gone. It had been a few minutes of frantic conversation and distress after the revelation of the consequences of Tommy getting captured. None of the Rangers quite seemed to want to believe it. Even Alpha seemed to be denying it as he brought forth various devices, tweaking the controls before waving them around the Green Ranger. It seemed as though none of the readings were to Alpha's liking though, as he would just retrieve another device and repeat the process each time. For his part, Tommy was taking all this with a stoic expression on his face. This may well be because he had had longer to come to terms with his situation. Kimberly was, predictably, standing as close as possible to Tommy's side, clutching onto his left arm as she worriedly watched the robot's activity. Trini had spent some time near Harry, ostensibly making sure he was all right, before moving to offer comfort to her overly stressed friend. Billy was grimly watching over Alpha's shoulder, occasionally offering a comment on Alpha's readings or a suggestion for how to proceed. Harry, Jason, and Zach were united in their grim reactions. The three were standing near one of the computer banks, watching the proceedings with neutral looks even as their minds raced. Finally, Harry turned to the sole source of true calm in the room. Zordon, have you ever seen anything like this before? I mean, is this something we might be able to stop? Harry's words caught the attention of the other Rangers as well, each of them happy to leave their own worried thoughts in hopes that their mentor would have an answer. The floating head hummed in thought for a moment. I have not seen anything like this in person, however, I have heard tales of other such artifacts being created. In my youth, while studying under my own MSTR in the ways of the grid, I was told a tale of a dark sorcerer who rose to prominence through a ritual he created. This ritual used power-draining artifacts he crafted that were linked to the essence of another grid user. In those cases, the very life essence of the one linked was drained alongside their power, giving this dark sorcerer extended life as well as more power. Kimberly's face went white and she clutched Tommy's arm harder than she already had been. Harry wouldn't have been surprised if the Green Ranger had lost feeling in that hand at this point. Zordon continued, apparently unaware of anything else as he sifted through his memories of long ago. In this case, however, I do not believe that Tommy is in that level of danger. Because each of you, with the exception of Harry, access the grid's power through the medium of your power coins, any candle linked to you would have to do so through the same medium, which should prevent the draining of your life force as a consequence. It is quite likely that this is the reason that Tommy's morpher was taken. Aside from preventing him from fighting back as effectively, his power coin was needed to properly link the enchanted wax to Tommy's connection to the grid. Zordon let out a sigh. Unfortunately, I do not know of any way to stop the transference of power without the candle itself. Harry grit his teeth. And I doubt that Rita would keep the candle anywhere we could get at it easily after we came so close in the dark dimension. The room was silent for the next several moments, save for the typical beeping noises from the computers and the humming of Zordon's projector. So, if Rita is draining Tommy's powers, Jason said, pausing to take a breath, clearly struggling with the thought. Does that mean that she's going to be morphing into the Green Ranger herself? Luckily for Jason's peace of mind, as well as that of the others, Zordon shook his head. It is highly unlikely, Jason. In order for Rita to utilize the green power that way, she would have to obtain the coin as well as the power. I designed the Mighty Morphin power so that the coins are essential to utilizing the power. It was only because Rita stole the green coin initially that she was able to utilize it in the first place. I would imagine that Rita merely hopes to deprive us of Tommy's help, and that of the Dragonzord. Or give us something else to worry about while she makes her big play. Tommy interjected, bringing everyone else to a stop. The Green Ranger had a look of resignation on his face, but his eyes were full of resolve. It doesn't matter though. My power doesn't matter. We have to focus on stopping Rita from destroying the city and on freeing all the people she has trapped. But Tommy, Kimberly said softly, if you lose your power, you won't be a ranger anymore. Tommy shot his girlfriend a small smile before running his gaze around the room, meeting the eyes of everyone else as he spoke. Yeah, the Green Ranger might be finished, but I've still got some fight left in me. How long will it be before my power is gone? According to the scanners, Alpha started. And the results from the multiphasic analyzer, the transdimensional contaminant detector, the handheld polymorphic resonance isolator, the dash. Alpha, Harry cut the robot off. The point, please? If Alpha could have blushed, the robot would have been bright red. As it was, Harry was convinced that the randomly blinking lights on his torso and the lights running across his visor were moving faster. Right. According to the readings, Tommy's power will be fully drained in slightly less than 48 hours in his current form. If he were to get closer to the green candle or morph, then I suspect that the rate could be multiplied many times over. Tommy nodded grimly before meeting everyone's eyes again. Then you'll have the Green Ranger fighting alongside you for one more battle. Everyone was silent in the wake of Tommy's firm declaration. Finally, Zordon broke the silence, warmth in his voice. And that, Tommy, is why you are suited to being a Power Ranger. Even though Rita had alternative reasons for selecting you to wield the green power coin, I could not have selected a more appropriate candidate if I tried. Tommy smiled, even as he ducked his head a bit in embarrassment. Thanks, Zordon. Just then, the command center's alarms went off. Ay. Alpha chanted, speed-waddling over to one of the computer banks. The proximity sensors have been triggered. Rita's palace is right over Angel Grove. Almost as one, Harry and the Rangers turned to face the viewing globe as it lit up from within. Moments later, the image cleared to reveal the flying form of Rita's palace hovering in place over the city. Why is she just floating there? Jason asked, his face scrunched up in thought. Oh great, Zack groaned, rolling his eyes. As if it wouldn't have been hard enough to kick her off our planet already, she's gonna be flying around everywhere too. Then the image of Rita's palace began turning before it floated off toward what Harry thought were the older parts of the city. Where's she going now? Trini asked. Harry was just as confused as the others up until the moment when a red light began shining from a point rather high up the central tower, most likely where Rita's balcony was. Before any of the Rangers could comment, the light pulsed brightly and lanced outward from the palace and down toward the city, resulting in a plume of smoke and dust billowing up beyond the rooftops. Then, slowly, the palace rotated once more before lowering down through the billowing smoke, settling down to the ground in Angel Grove. And then the image on the viewing globe flickered briefly before changing entirely, showing the quite unwelcome sight of Rita's sneering face. Rangers. Rita drawled, smirking from within the viewing globe. I know you're watching me, Rangers. I propose that we settle this once and for all. I will meet you in the town square of Angel Grove. Don't delay too long though, there's no telling what could happen to all the people of the city if you do. With an evil cackle that sent a chill down Harry's spine, Rita's image vanished, once again replaced by the view of the cityscape of Angel Grove, now with the alien towers of Rita's palace sticking up amongst the buildings and the smoke from Rita's attack. Ay. Alpha was panicking again. Rita must have hijacked the feed to send her message. What are we going to do, Zordon? Rita's on Earth. Her power will be much greater now that she's so close to the focal point. Zordon let out yet another sigh. I'm afraid there is only one thing that we can do, Alpha. That's right. Jason ground out through his clenched teeth while staring down at his white-knuckled fists. Rita has come down to our city and decided to challenge us. I say we meet her and beat her back again. Yeah. Zack took up Jason's angry enthusiasm. We have to take her down, and this Cyclopsis robot of hers. She has our families and friends. Billy and the others merely nodded in agreement as Jason met each of their gazes individually. Finally, his eyes settled on Harry, who still hadn't taken his eyes off the viewing globe. He continued staring blankly for a few moments, his mind processing the entire situation until a squeeze of his hand brought him out of it. Harry blinked rapidly and looked toward Trini, who held his hand tightly and met his gaze with steely determination. Harry nodded to her in thanks before meeting the eyes of his teammates one after another, finally stopping on Jason's angry eyes. Harry held the Red Ranger's gaze for several seconds before giving him a slight nod. I believe that you have a call to make, don't you, Jason? Jason nodded in return before glancing up to Zordon. The wizard smiled, seeing his team of Rangers +1 ready to enter what may well be the final battle of this war against Rita. So be it. Tommy, Alpha and I will monitor your power levels from here. Try not to push yourself too far. There's no telling how long your power will last with you in Morph and so close to Rita's palace and the green candle by consequence. Zordon swept his gaze across the group before speaking again. Remember Rangers, you must not drop your guard even once. Rita is much more powerful now than any other time you have faced her. Likewise, you must assume that any monsters or putties you face will be similarly stronger. Take no chances you do not have to. She has yet to call Cyclopsis into being, but I sense that she has further plans that we will have to be ready for. Despite this, I am very confident that you will prevail today. Be wary Rangers, and may the power protect you. Jason swept his gaze over the others as they moved to stand behind him spread out almost in formation. Even Harry joined them, the only difference being that he could feel the grids influencing him to do so, and took his place on the opposite side from Tommy at the outside edge of the group. Let's save our city, guys, Jason said, determination hardening his voice. It's Morphin time. Mastodon. Pterodactyl. Triceratops. Saber-toothed tiger. Tyrannosaurus. Dragonzord. Magi Ranger, power up. Rita had set her palace down on the grounds of Angel Grove City Hall. The fact that she had had to remove the building in question was just a minor detail that was only really evident because of the smoldering bits of foundation exposed where Rita's palace didn't quite cover it all up. Just ahead of the relocated palace was a square piece of real estate that had been preserved in the same state almost since the founding of the city. Once in almost exactly the center of Angel Grove, before increased population and industrialization and the like had brought about expansion away from the coastline, the town square was dotted with old trees, statues, and gardens that were a tribute to the city's history. It was to this location that the 7 Rangers teleported in columns of light, almost immediately dropping into fighting stances when they fully materialized, only to find nobody to meet them. "Where's Rita?" Jason all but demanded, jerking his head this way and that as he searched for the Space Witch. "She probably didn't expect us to show up so soon," Zach commented, straightening up slightly, though not really letting himself relax from his stance too much. "More likely she has some kind of a trap planned for us," Kimberly said, looking about frantically for any sign of such a thing. Then Rita's voice echoed across the small park. "Nonsense, Pink Ranger. Setting a trap for you would mean that I felt I needed such a thing to win." Harry snorted. "Well, for supposedly not needing traps, you sure have liked setting them in the past." Rita crooned mockingly. "Is the Magling still upset about his time in my palace? Did the Twin Man and I hurt your feelings?" Harry's anger spiked and his magic reacted, lightning crackling around his tightly clenched fists. "Why don't you show yourself, Rita, and I'll show you some hurt feelings." Rita's laughter echoed across the area before a bright flash heralded the witch's arrival around 20 feet away. "Happily, Magling. If I knew you were so eager to meet your end, I wouldn't have wasted your precious time. I'm always happy to assist those with a death wish you see, especially when they have arrayed themselves against me. We're not the ones losing here today, Rita," Jason shouted, stepping forward a few steps as the other 4 core Rangers stepped up behind him in a wedge formation while Tommy and Harry stood off to either side. "Oh, very original, Red Ranger," Rita said with a smirk. "But to be honest, my fight isn't with you at the moment. I have something else planned for you." Jason summoned his power sword in a flash of red light before brandishing it toward the witch. "If you think we're going to go along with anything you have planned, then you've got another thing coming." Rita seemed to consider this for a moment, though Harry could tell through her body language and the pure aura of smugness he could almost feel that she was just playing with them. "You do have a point, Red Ranger. I suppose I'll have to force you all into doing what I want then, won't I? Very well then." Rita brought her staff into a two-handed grip before jabbing it forward. The Rangers tensed up as she began moving, but only Harry was able to detect the buildup of power. Only Harry noticed Rita's noticeably increased reserves of power changing into a massive amount of Rita's bastardized version of wizarding magic through the Elder Wand that was now pointing at his teammates. Only Harry recognized the telltale sickly green glow of magic forming at the tip of the Elder Wand. Avada Kedavra. For a split second, Harry's mind ground to a halt. How had Rita learned the killing curse? Even while he was in her palace, he had never mentioned more than the slightest hint of the unforgivables, and even that was only under a great amount of duress. It was highly unlikely that Rita had been able to break through his occlumency to steal the knowledge directly from his mind. No doubt she would have pressured him more specifically on those spells if she had. Then, as Harry's mind started up again in the next instant, he realized that there was no time for ponderings now. He had to act, or else his teammates would pay the price. With a gesture of his left hand, Harry wandlessly transfigured the earth in front of Jason into a concrete barrier that rose to stand in the way of Rita's spell. With his other hand, Harry summoned up the Magi staff and used it to cast an angled banishing charm on the other 6 rangers, throwing them backwards from the barrier just as the killing curse hit it and blasted it into gravel. Rita's wicked laughter once more echoed around the area as Harry seethed and the other rangers climbed to their feet again. A most invigorating spell, maggling, and quite powerful too. Even in my wildest dreams I never thought I would learn of a magic that could snuff out a life quite as effectively as your killing curse. Marvelous. Harry's teeth were clenched so hard he was sure they were going to crack under the pressure. How? I did everything I could to avoid teaching you anything worthwhile while you held me captive. So how did you manage to learn the killing curse? Rita's smile only grew. It was really you who made it possible, maggling, and I don't just mean because I wouldn't have even known of this type of magic if you hadn't shown up. I'm sure you remember when we had you convinced that we had your little girlfriend captive, yes? Rita paused as if to allow Harry time to answer, even though Harry remained stoically silent as the other rangers moved to gather behind him. They recognized that they were out of their field of expertise at this point. Rita continued as if Harry had spoken though, her amusement clear. Well, it only took the one bit of information you let slip before your rescue party arrived to set me on the right path. The Unforgivables, yes, a wonderful name for a set of wonderful spells, though I think you can understand why the killing curse is my favorite. The sheer power in such a magic will make me the strongest being in the universe. I was able to learn of them all through a simple ritual focused on the wand I took from your inept hands that allowed me a look into the past of those who held it. I know every spell ever cast through this wand now, and that includes all 3 of the unforgivable curses. I just needed your little hint to point me in the right direction. Harry felt a hand grip his left arm and turned to see Trini. Harry, she asked in concern. What's she talking about? Harry growled lightly. Rita made me think that they had captured you 2 just before Tommy and Kimberly busted me out. I mentioned the Unforgivables by their classification before we were distracted by the initial explosion they caused. I never thought she'd be able to get anything from that though. Kimberly gasped. That's what you meant, isn't it? When you said you had screwed up. I completely forgot about that after the problems we had with our escape. Rita cut in at that point, still smirking at the rangers. Yes, Harry gave me all I needed to learn about his brand of magic without his help, and what a wonderful gift it was. Rita began cackling again as Jason came up on Harry's other side and rested a hand on his shoulder. Harry, he said quietly. Can you beat her? I mean, now that she knows your magic. Harry shook his head, forcing himself to relax and think things through. I think so. Just because she knows the spells and presumably how to cast them, doesn't mean she can use them to their potential. I spent a few years training against the very spells she is most likely to use, so I have an advantage there. Not to mention the fact that her scepter makes casting anything too complex very time-consuming and difficult. It's her increased grid power that worries me, but I can't do anything but try. Jason nodded before raising his voice. All right, Rangers. Let's take her down. I think not, Rangers. Rita screeched, cutting their imminent charge short as she moved her staff upwards, releasing bolts of lightning from it that arced to the top of her palace. The very tip of the topmost spire began to glow before, with a flash of light, the massive, robotic form of Cyclopsis appeared, looming over the Rangers while the witch laughed again. Come and get me, Rangers. Golder's voice echoed from the massive machine as its eyes lit up and it began moving off into the city, shaking the ground with each step. The Maggling has an appointment with my Empress, but if you don't stop me, I'll destroy the city. Harry cursed under his breath. He's right. You guys have to call the Zords and go after Golder and Cyclopsis. I'll take care of Rita and join you as soon as I can. Harry, Trini spoke up from his side, once more tightening her grip on his arm. Are you sure? Harry shot her an unseen smile and drew her into a brief, one-armed hug. I'll be fine, Trini. Have faith in me and in the power, and there's nothing we can't accomplish. Zack gave a snort. Wow, Harry, way to channel Zordon there. Harry rolled his eyes even as Jason took charge once again, the other core Rangers moving into formation again and mimicking his movements. All right, Rangers, let's go take care of Cyclopsis. We need Dinozord power, now. As the others leapt/teleported away to meet their Zords, Harry shot a glance at Tommy. You better get going, he said, seeing his teammate/teacher seem hesitant to leave him with Rita. They're going to need your help and that of the Dragonzord. Tommy hesitated a bit longer, but eventually nodded. Just be careful, Harry. I don't trust her. Harry snorted, even as he kept one eye on the still smirking Rita. She seemed rather prepared to wait, but he didn't know how long that would last. And you think I do? Still, I have a few tricks she hasn't seen yet. It's never a good idea to go into a battle with a new spell and expect to beat someone who has already been using it for years. Tommy nodded again. Alright, good luck, man, and then he was gone in a teleport. Moments later, Harry heard the familiar summoning tune as Tommy called his own Zord into play. Finally, Rita drawled, idly buffing the nails of her offhand on her robe/dress. Alone at last. I've been looking forward to this battle, Maggling. Ever since we met atop the building when I first learned of the potential behind your spells. This shall be a battle like none before. Harry rolled his eyes. Rita had a point. This battle could well be one of the most difficult he had ever been in. It was certainly not a time to hold back. Then let's stop yapping and get to it. Without another word, Harry snapped off a quick blasting curse that he followed with a stunner. Rita almost negligently sidestepped the two spells, almost seeming to blur with how fast she moved, before intricately moving her staff around to mimic wand movements. This time, Harry was sure she was blurring, but didn't have much time to dwell on it before Rita called out her spell. Bombarda Maxima. Harry, with an equally negligent reaction, casually swept Rita's overcharged exploding curse to one side, sending it harmlessly into the air with the ease of long practice. He then returned fire with a short string of cutters topped with a body bind that splashed against a hastily erected shield of power from Rita's ring focuses on her offhand. The battle continued like this for several minutes. Rita with her strangely blurred and rapid staff movement and equally speedy dodging or powerful shields powered by grid magic against Harry with his precise wand movements and expertise with the occasional dodge, roll, or flip to avoid some of Rita's better aimed spells. So, Harry almost casually asked as he ducked under several nasty curses. Are you about ready to stop with the warm-up yet? Harry felt he had gotten a grip on the witch's tactics. It appeared that she had done something to increase her speed to compensate for the cumbersome wand/staff movements necessary for her to use wizarding magic. Whether or not Harry could cancel whatever spellwork she had done was still unknown, but it might be worth finding out. The trick would be to do so and then capitalize on the weakness before Rita reverted to using grid magic, where she held the decided advantage. It was really only Rita's own ego leading to her believing she could beat Harry at his own brand of magic that gave him this level of confidence. Rita scoffed as she shielded several spells Harry sent her way in return. What do you mean, warm up, Maggling? You don't stand a chance against me, especially not while I control the unbeatable Elder Wand. Case in point. Harry rolled his eyes again. You know, Rita. Many before you have thought exactly the same thing, and yet you would know better than most how many hands that wand has passed through. Whether the owner lost through battle or through treachery, just owning it doesn't ensure victory. For example, Harry dodged to one side, avoid yet another volley of spells, before tapping his staff on the ground and releasing a pulse of magic. Almost immediately, the ground between the two magic users rippled as if it was water before a section of it tore itself out of the ground, shifting form as it went into a 10-foot-tall green and brown lion. The transfigured and animated beast pounced at Rita, forcing the witch to blur to the side to avoid it, only to nearly get caught by a 30-foot-long snake transfigured from a long row of hedges. You see, Rita, Harry continued even as he magically merged a few statues together before transfiguring the resulting chunk of stone into a gigantic badger. While I may have been doing everything I could to avoid teaching you too much of use, and I'm sure you can't really blame me for that, there was still a point to it all. Rita tried to levitate herself into the air, only for Harry to summon up a massive burst of wind. The force of nature buffeted the witch and knocked her back to the ground where she was forced to wrap herself in a dome shield that was quickly set upon by the three transfigured beasts. You have to start small if you want to cast anything really impressive. These things take time. Harry was almost enjoying his lecture/rant as he transfigured a portion of the nearby gardens into a colorful raven and set it flying over Rita's shield to prevent her from taking to the air again. You chose the quick path, a shortcut, and that will be your downfall. Harry twisted in place, vanishing with a crack only to reappear within Rita's dome shield. With a grunt, Harry moved his staff forward into Rita's back, delivering a strong physical blow simultaneously with a grid-powered cancellation spell. The witch flew forward, caught off guard as her shield dropped with her loss of concentration. Harry's transfigured beasts formed up behind him, each of them pacing the ranger as he walked up to Rita. When the witch stumbled back to her feet, her speed enhancement spell broken, Harry sent a blasting curse at her, forcing her to shield with her offhand focuses. When his spell shattered her hastily erected protection, Harry performed a switching spell, swapping the focus rings on her offhand with empty air. As Harry drew nearer, he could see Rita begin to panic, even as she drew up and converted even more power to wizarding magic. Your problem, Rita, is that you believe that you cannot be beaten with this new magic at your disposal. Magic which you only just learned and that I've studied for the last 8 years of my life. Imperio. Rita had given up on the complex wand movements for the moment. Especially now that they would take her far too long without her speed enchantment. No, far better to stick with the unblockable spells that only required the right mental state and power to cast. Harry just kept on walking, letting the spell hit and then throwing off the effects with the ease of one who has done so many times in the past and against far better users of the spell than she. As he got closer, Rita took too big of a step back, tripping over her robes and dropping to the ground again. On top of that, if you've looked into the past of the Elder Wand, Harry mused aloud as he walked, then you must know of the legend of the Deathly Hallows and what it means for one person to collect them all. Crucio! Rita incanted, letting loose the bright red Cruciatus curse that Harry merely intercepted with a conjured stone slab before banishing the shards back at the witch, though there was admittedly little effect to be had. You know that the one who collects all the Hallows becomes known as the MSTR of Death. Now, in truth there is little to that title, despite what some may believe, but one thing that does come with it is total and unending dominion over all artifacts of death. Avada Kedavra! Rita near screamed, continuing to try and scoot backwards on the ground as the Magi Ranger drew ever closer. For his part, Harry could tell what she was going to try to cast from the first syllable, meaning he had plenty of time to conjure up another stone slab. This one was practically in Rita's face, so the witch was showered with the shards of stone without any further input from him. That spell really was impractically long to cast, especially when one's opponent was already expecting it and prepared for such. Harry used the distraction of the destruction of this last barrier to his advantage though, operating silently while Rita was still reeling from the bombardment of stone shards and reappearing just behind her. I am the MSTR of Death, Rita Repulsa. Harry said in his darkest tone, using magic to amplify his voice as the witch twisted to face him from the ground, tangling her legs up in her robes in the process. I am the MSTR of the Elder Wand, and I've come for what's mine. Rita tried to bring her staff around to face Harry, but he knocked it away with a swift swing of the Magi staff. Return the Elder Wand to me now, Rita, or I think you'll find that you won't like the consequences. Rita's eyes were wider than the Magi Ranger had ever seen them as he loomed over her. The presence of his transfigured animals behind her probably didn't help her nerves at all. Not that Harry was at all concerned about that. If Harry hadn't been so focused on Rita, he might have noticed the slender figure charging at him from the side. As it was, Scorpina was able to drop-kick him solidly, knocking him away from Rita with a ridiculous amount of ease. Moments later, her boomerang-shaped sword lashed out, beheading each of his transfigured allies and breaking the spells holding them together before she pulled Rita to her feet. Empress, Scorpina said quickly, keeping one eye on the recovering Magi Ranger. Come Empress, we must return to the palace. Golder can take care of the Rangers, but you must recover. Rita glared at Harry even as the Magi Ranger kicked back up to his feet. No! Harry shouted, letting loose with a flurry of destructive spells even as he cursed himself for losing his awareness. Rita once again shielded against the spells, a much more solid shield that held against Harry's assault, even as her eyes shone with hatred. Perhaps you are right, Scorpina, Rita growled, her gaze never leaving Harry even as the Magi Ranger's barrage increased in intensity, now joined by 11 bolts from his offhand. Harry could only watch as Rita straightened up and adjusted her robes around herself. He knew that his momentum had been lost with Scorpina's arrival, but it was a hard pill to swallow. He had been so close. Finishing with her self-adjustments, Rita returned her full gaze to Harry. Know this, Magling, you may have won this battle, but you and the rest of those pathetic power brats will not win the war. You cannot hope to stand up to the might of Cyclopsis. Harry let his 11-bolt die off even as he stopped the furious casting with his staff, leveling an unseen glare of his own at Rita. Sometimes, wearing a helmet really got in the way of expressing oneself. You've said that many times before, Rita, but we're still here. Rita didn't respond verbally. Instead, lifting her staff up slightly before bringing it down with a magically amplified crack and a flash of light. When the light faded, the two evil women were gone once again. Harry sighed and turned his attention toward Angel Grove proper. He could feel the slightest of tremors in the ground which told him the giant robot battle was still going on. With Rita driven off, even though Harry failed to regain the Elder Wand in this his best chance so far to do so, all the Magi Ranger was left to do was help his teammates with Golder and Cyclopsis. After one more glance toward the nearby hulk of Rita's palace, from which Harry was sure the space which was watching him, Harry teleported away. When he rematerialized atop one of the taller buildings in downtown Angel Grove, he immediately noticed the massive form of the Mega Dragon Zord. This Zord combination was the same one Harry had first seen when the Rangers formed the Ultrazord against the Samurai Fan Man. While it was rather bulky with the vertically split Dragon Zord resting as it was along the Megazord's shoulders, the Zord moved surprisingly quickly, dodging around the strikes made by Cyclopsis's stubby-looking arms. Golder had apparently come to the same conclusion as Cyclopsis, backed up several steps before crossing its arms over its chest and then flinging them to either side. On either side of its chest, 2 panels rose up to reveal multiple missiles that were then launched toward the Rangers. From within the smoke cloud that resulted from multiple explosions, a bright light flashed before lancing out toward Cyclopsis as the Mega Dragonzord returned fire. When the smoke cleared, there was little damage to be seen on either machine. "Harry?" Tommy's voice came from behind him. Harry spun, his staff glowing briefly until he spotted the Green Ranger. "Whoa, man," Tommy said, raising his hands up in surrender. "It's just me." Harry sighed and let the glow of power die off. "Sorry, I'm a bit on edge. Rita got away. I nearly had her when Scorpina got in the way." Harry could almost feel Tommy's grimace. "Hey, no worries, man. Rita's slippery, but we'll get her eventually." Further conversation was cut off as the Mega Dragonzord landed a thunderous blow against Cyclopsis and sent the War Zord reeling backwards. Then Jason's voice echoed across their communicators. "I call upon the power of Titanus and the Ultrazord." Harry felt the vibrations echoing up through the building below him as Titanus rolled through the city on its treads. He watched as Jason called for the transformation sequence and the Mega Dragonzord jumped on board Titanus. "Lock on and fire." Harry watched as the multitude of destructive blasts of every color burst forth from the Ultrazord and peppered Cyclopsis until it fell back to the ground and exploded. Harry let himself smile beneath his helmet. He may not have been able to take out Rita himself, but at least Cyclopsis had been dealt with, and Zordon had been quite certain that the War Zord was a much greater threat. He had felt a pulse of power just before Cyclopsis exploded, which was most likely Golder teleporting out, but he wasn't worried about that at the moment. "Do you really think it would be that easy, Rangers?" The earth began shaking once again as Rita's voice echoed across the area. Tommy and Harry began looking around even as Mega Dragonzord jumped free of Titanus and moved to stand near their building. Harry felt a pulse of power and turned toward it, spotting the figures of Rita, Golder, and Scorpina on a building a few blocks away. "Over there!" he shouted, pointing his teammates in the right direction as he started gathering up power again. Now that she had their attention, Rita continued. "Did you really think that I wouldn't have a backup plan in place? That I didn't expect for you to find a way to defeat Cyclopsis?" Rita's laughter grew in volume before she raised her staff up over her head and the red gem mounted on it began to shine with power. "I call upon the power of Loker. Come to me now and fulfill the wishes of your summoner." Just as the last time Loker was summoned by Rita, the sky darkened until it resembled a starless night. Then, with a flash of lightning, the blue-skinned and spiky-haired face of Loker appeared in the sky. The dimensionally trapped dark wizard glared heatedly down at the Rangers, though Harry could almost feel the extra focus placed on him. "And now Loker," Rita called out. "I command you to bring back Cyclopsis, greater than ever before. Combine your power with that of Cyclopsis and bring me victory in battle." Loker's eyes immediately began to glow as more lightning lanced through the sky around him. Then, several lights burst into view coming from the ground and rising into the air. When they got high enough, Harry was able to make out pieces of metal of varying sizes that clustered together just beneath Loker. The last piece was the largely intact head of Cyclopsis, its eyes lighting up from within as Loker channeled his power into the remains of the War Zord. With a final flash of light that was blinding in its intensity, Loker vanished and Cyclopsis was reformed. The War Zord, once more standing strong before the Rangers, was largely the same. The first real difference to be seen was that the single horn/spike atop its head was now 3 with the 2 new ones jutting off at an angle from either side. Aside from that, it was now equipped with 2 long blades, one extending from the back of each hand, more than making up for the lack of reach it had before. With another brief flash of light, Golder vanished from Rita's side once again and Cyclopsis took a fighting stance mere moments later. "And now Rangers," Golder's voice came from his War Zord. "You are all doomed." Harry felt a sense of dread hit him and brought his communicator up. "Jason. Ultrazord. Now." "Yeah right," Jason responded, hesitant at first but then firmer. "Titanus, form the Ultrazord, now." "Oh no you don't, Rangers." Rita screeched, bringing Harry's attention back to her just as her jabbed her scepter toward Titanus just as the Zord's neck shifted lower to allow access to the Mega Dragonzord. Before Harry could react, a blast of incredible power shot from Rita's scepter and struck the ground just in front of the massive Zord, causing the earth beneath it to begin to shake. "No!" Jason shouted amidst similar cries of denial and disbelief from the other core Rangers within the Mega Dragonzord as Titanus began roaring in a manner that was all too organic for a robot in Harry's opinion. Then Titanus began to sink as the ground below it collapsed into a sinkhole. Within seconds, all that was visible of Titanus was its head and the top third of its neck. The Mega Dragonzord moved as close as it could, kneeling down at the edge of the sinkhole and grabbing at Titanus, trying to pull the Zord free from Rita's trap, but to no avail. Mere moments later, Titanus was gone. And now, Rangers, Golder announced. The battle can truly begin. But without the use of Ultrazord and with Cyclopsis more powerful than before, Harry knew things had just gotten much more difficult. The seconds stretched on into minutes as the two massive machines stared each other down. On one side, there was the Mega Dragonzord. Piloted by the mighty Morphin Power Rangers to great success many times since they gained the power, it was a tried-and-true weapon that was only made even more powerful with the addition of the Dragonzord's power. It was hard to imagine anything able to stand up against such an awesome force. On the other side was Cyclopsis. By all accounts, this was a dangerous enemy to fight, more so than anything they had faced so far certainly. It was a massive engine of destruction that had been used by Rita and piloted by Golder many times in the past and had only been made more powerful with the addition of Loker's power upon its reconstruction. The battle was only going to get harder from here. And then time seemed to return to normal again as Jason spoke. "All right, Rangers," he half shouted. "We beat this guy one, we can do it again. Let's let him have it." "Right," the others within the Mega Dragonzord chanted. Harry just shot a look to Tommy where he stood next to him. The Green Ranger seemed just as caught up in the moment as the others. Harry could only assume it was the grid's influence. This could be both a good and bad thing to Harry's mind. It would keep his friends focused on the battle, but it might keep them a bit too focused, keeping them involved in the battle when retreating and regrouping might be better. While this was only a theory on Harry's part, he was never happier for his somewhat weaker connection to the grid. It was something that Harry had had in the back of his mind ever since he first negotiated with the grid for the Magi Ranger power. The grid was little more than an audience/enabler for the entire conflict that ravaged this universe, it had all but admitted as much. This didn't seem to bother Zordon too much, but seeing the other ways the grid had influenced his teammates, and even himself on a few occasions, the entire situation made Harry uneasy. No matter how you looked at it, the grid was influencing those that used its power for its own entertainment. Harry was snapped out of his thoughts by the movement of the two Zords as they charged forward. The Mega Dragonzord was a bit slower than other Zord configurations Harry had seen his teammates use, most likely because of the extra weight and bulk from all of their Zords combined as they were. In comparison, Cyclopsis was much more slender and even a bit shorter, and moved much, much faster. The result of their different speeds was that they met much closer to the Mega Dragonzord's starting position and that Cyclopsis had more momentum. Moving like the powerful giant it was, the Mega Dragonzord lumbered forward and led with a right hook. Cyclopsis moved to meet the Mega Dragonzord and almost casually deflected the strong blow with its left hand before delivering a backhanded slash with the blade on its right, landing the hit on the Zord's torso under its arm. Harry heard the Rangers cry out in panic over the communicator as their Zord reeled back a few steps accompanied by sparks, only for their cries to redouble when Cyclopsis followed up with a rapid-fire series of slashes. Each blow was delivered around the Zord's flailing attempts to defend itself, one strike knocking an arm aside while the other followed through the new opening to hit the torso directly. The entire time, Jason and the others were wrestling with their controls, trying to find a way to mount a counterattack. "Jason, we're losing structural integrity on both arms. Our power levels are dropping fast. I don't know how much more we can take. He's too fast." Harry growled before gathering his power and raising his arm into the air. "I call upon the Silver Owl Zord, Hedwig." With the now familiar flash of purple light and avian screech, Hedwig appeared in the air above Angel Grove and immediately dove down toward the battle. Mere moments before she reached Cyclopsis though, the Zord ducked backwards and to one side, almost negligently dodging Hedwig's stoop and forcing the owl to pull up sharply to avoid a rather violent meeting with the ground. Golder said, a suspiciously satisfied tone to his voice. "So it seems the Megaling has finally decided to join the party, eh?" By this point, Hedwig had bled off her extra speed and was now hovering in midair some distance behind Cyclopsis with the Mega Dragonzord standing an equal distance in front of it. Harry narrowed his eyes for a moment before nodding firmly and turning to Tommy. "Take care of yourself, Tommy. I'm going to join in on the fun." "All right, Harry," the Green Ranger said with a nod of his own. "Be careful. Golder is sounding way too smug to not have a plan." Silently, Harry agreed, but he said nothing, merely twisting in place, vanishing, and reappearing upon Hedwig's head with a near-silent pop. "Are you ready, Harry/Wizard?" Hedwig asked. "As always, Hedwig. Let's do this." As Harry spun his staff to gather the necessary power for their fusion, he nearly missed Cyclopsis turning sideways, pointing one of its arm blades at them and the other at the Mega Dragonzord. "I think not. Take this." Golder roared as Cyclops's blades lit up with an internal light before letting loose bolts of electricity from each one that lanced toward their targets. Hedwig was forced to fire up her rocket boosters, launching them straight up into the air in order to dodge the attack and simultaneously forcing Harry to crouch down and apply a light sticking charm to his feet to avoid falling. "DMN it," Harry growled, watching from above as Cyclopsis began its assault on the Mega Dragonzord again. Harry's teammates had been unable to dodge the lightning attack from the War Zord and so were one more left open for Cyclops's superior speed to bring it up to them and resume the blistering barrage of sword strikes. "Come on, Hedwig," Harry finally said. "We have to pull Golder off of them before he demolishes the Mega Dragonzord." "Right away, Harry/Wizard. Hold on tight." With that, Hedwig fired her rockets again, launching them slightly higher into the air before she angled her wings to propel them forward and then folded them entirely to enter into another dive. For Harry, for an instant, he was back at Hogwarts, playing Quidditch and in a dive for the snitch. The rush of adrenaline he got from diving from such a height at such a speed was something he really hadn't experienced for a very long time. Flying, really flying, was something he missed dearly. And then, all at once, Harry was back in the present, he and Hedwig drawing closer and closer to Cyclops's unprotected back as the War Zord landed a few more blows on the Mega Dragonzord. Once again, just before they would have landed their attack, Cyclopsis ducked to one side, forcing Hedwig to flare her wings and fire her rockets in order to avoid crashing into their teammates. This time, however, Golder had something else in store for them. The first clue Harry got that something was very wrong was when their controlled, if rather abrupt, change of direction changed into a spinning tumble through the air signaled by the sound of wrenching metal on metal. Hedwig's mental cry of pain and panic followed up by an instinctual fear was Harry's only warning before he and his familiar Zord crashed into the Mega Dragonzord, sending both machines to the ground in a heap. Luckily for Harry, Hedwig had crashed into the Mega Dragonzord mostly belly to belly, so Harry wasn't crushed by the contact. Unluckily, Hedwig's now severed right wing landed a short distance away, crashing into a building before falling to street level, showing Harry just what had happened. "Hedwig!" Harry shouted, reaching through their familiar bond frantically, searching for any sign from the owl. "I am functioning, Harry/Wizard." The answer came several seconds later than the wizard might have liked, but he still released a breath of relief when it did. "There is no pain. It is a most curious sensation. However, I do not believe I will be able to fly anymore." Harry nearly rolled his eyes at Hedwig's matter-of-fact answer. "Can we still fuse? Do you think we can still form warrior mode?" It wasn't like they had much else in the way of options at this point. "More to the point," Jason said over the communicator. "Can you get off of us? Golder is still on the attack." Harry turned his head, having to pivot in place at the waist because of his still active sticking charm, and caught sight of Cyclopsis standing several Zord paces away. Golder's laugh then echoed out across the area. Magling, it looks like I have you right where I want you now." The two missile pods rose from Cyclops's chest once more, revealing a fresh barrage of missiles and making Harry's eyes widen in panic. "Goodbye, Magling." Harry had mere moments to act as the first of the barrage launched. First things first, he cancelled the sticking charm, operating quickly to the back of Hedwig's head so he could maintain an easier footing. Then, he reached deep within himself, grabbing onto his available reservoir of power and funneling it into his staff and pulling up as much of his magic as he could and channeling it through his offhand. With a shout of exertion, Harry moved his staff forward and unleashed a storm of lightning at the oncoming explosives. From his staff, Harry used his power to create a simple lightning spell, one of the easiest offensive spells offered by grid magic and the only one he had really mastered to this point, having spent more time on his general grid control exercises and combining grid magic with his own. From his offhand, Harry unleashed a torrent of 11 bolts, the arcing energy branching out as it went and meeting several of the missiles in midair, setting them off at a safe distance. Yet the barrage continued. When his available power ran out, Harry was forced to dismiss the Magi staff, bringing up more of his own magic and sending forth a torrent of lightning from his right hand as well, simultaneously starting up his battle rhythm technique to help sustain the spells. His hands were lost in a shower of sparks and smoke as the 11 bolts did as much damage to Harry's suit as they were to Cyclops's missiles, but there was little Harry could do but keep it up as long as the explosions persisted. After another 10 seconds that seemed much longer, Harry had completely lost sight of Cyclopsis in the smokescreen caused by the explosions. Finally, Harry heard Golder let out an angry shout accompanied by a much-dimmed flash of light and shaking ground caused by heavy steps, and he let his spells die off. Only then did the exhaustion hit him and Harry dropped to his knees thereupon his Zord. "Holy CRP," Harry panted, staring down at his gloves, blackened by scorch marks from the 11 bolts. He hadn't felt this drained in months, at least since the Terror Toad attack when he had to fight the monster, Golder, and a group of putties alone. As the smoke began to clear, Harry glanced up and caught sight of Cyclopsis. The Zord was more or less undamaged, though there were several scorched trails of blackened metal where the Levin bolts had raked their way across the surface. It was most likely these bolts that had brought about Golder's reaction, though based on the general lack of damage, it was probably more from surprise than anything else. Once again, Magling, you have proven how much of an annoyance you can be. Golder growled as Cyclopsis took a few steps forward through the dissipating smoke, returning to its previous position. But it appears that you're on your last legs now. Technically, this wasn't true. While Harry was feeling rather exhausted, it was only from channeling so much wandless magic in so short a time. While the distinction made little real difference, Harry would be back on his feet, so to speak, in a few minutes. It was a few minutes that he very much doubted Golder would give him. Hang on, Harry. Tommy's voice caught his attention as the Green Ranger landed next to him on Hedwig's back. I've got ya, man. The Green Ranger then lifted him up, draping one of Harry's arms over his shoulders and carried him into a two-person leap that allowed them to clear the down Zords and land in the streets. As soon as they were out of the way, the Mega Dragon Zord began moving again. Without having to fear dislodging the Magi Ranger, the others piloted their Zord into moving the damaged Hedwig off to one side, setting her somewhat gently or as gently as could be managed by a giant robot on her talons before clambering back up to its feet. Hedwig stood, looking somewhat unsteady. Her head spun toward her severed wing lying on the ground to the joint where it had been removed and then to Cyclopsis before beginning the CYCL all over again. Harry, Jason called over the communicators again. Can you still fuse with Hedwig? We could really use some help here. Harry let out a growl as his panting slowed. I could if Golder would give me a chance. Unfortunately, it seems like that's not gonna happen. Even if I could get back over to her, Golder would either blast us again, or lay into you guys before we could do anything to help. DMN it. Jason cursed, then he continued a moment later. Alright Harry, you and Tommy should take cover. We're gonna give this guy everything we can while we still have something to give. But Jason, Billy interjected. Our power levels are already critically low after our initial battle with Cyclopsis and Golder's renewed attacks. Using too much power at once dash. I know it's risky, Billy. Jason cut the brainy ranger off. But we really don't have a lot of choice here. We're just too slow against Cyclopsis now and none of our other Zord combos stood a chance even before he got powered up by Loker. Jason's right. Zack said, his usual good humor gone from his voice, not that that was surprising given the situation. I say we hit him hard and fast while we still can. A few moments later, and the other Rangers had voiced their agreement. Then, Hedwig's voice rang through Harry's mind. I shall add what power I have to your teammates' attack too, Harry/Wizard. There is little else I can do as I am now. Harry nodded, sending a mental caress to his familiar. Guys, Hedwig says she'll give what she can to help out. Good, Jason's reply was rather grim. I have a feeling we'll need all we can get. Harry and Tommy exchanged a glance at Jason's tone, but shrugged it off moments later. With a mutual nod freaking grid guidance. The two Rangers leapt up into the air, Tommy still supporting Harry, and landed atop a building. From there, they jumped yet again, landing on another few blocks away before turning back to watch the fireworks. We're clear, Jason, Tommy called out. Go for it. Hedwig had hopped as close as she could to the Mega Dragon Zord's side and extended her remaining wing until it made contact. Then, the dome atop her head lit up with an internal light that traveled down her wing and into the Mega Dragon Zord. Meanwhile, the Rangers had started up the Mega Dragon Zord's finisher sequence and the machine's remaining power was charged into the Dragon Zord edition, focusing, oddly enough, in what had once been the Dragon Zord's knees and were now hanging down on either side of the Megazord's shoulders. Finally, as the glowing light became blinding, the Megazord's arms jerked out to each side, clanging into the glowing emitters which then released their energy at an angle that caused the two beams to connect a short distance in front of the Mega Dragon Zord. The power gathered there for a few moments, forming into a large orb of energy that, somehow, had what looked like a stylized Z in the middle of it. Mere moments later, with another gesture from the Zord and presumably from the Rangers inside it, the orb of destruction flew forward and slammed into Cyclopsis, which had remained unmoving the entire time. This should have really been their first clue that things had gone wrong. Cyclopsis was almost immediately hidden from sight by the explosion and resulting smoke cloud caused by the Mega Dragon Zord's attack. The Zord in question stood tall, though Hedwig appeared to be slumped slightly from lack of energy. The second seemed to take forever as the smoke billowed up through the sky over the deserted Angel Grove, hiding the result of the Rangers' attack. Somehow, Harry had the feeling that the battle wasn't quite over yet. This thought proved prophetic as a gust of wind accelerated the dispersal of the smoke, revealing Cyclops standing tall and only slightly more scorched than it had been after Harry's 11 bolts. A valiant effort. Power Rangers. Golder's voice was as smug as Harry had ever heard it, and it made his heart drop even as the Mega Dragonzord took a step back. But now it's my turn. With a roar from Golder, Cyclops's arms came up once again and the blades began glowing. Before anyone could react, arcs of lightning once more lanced forth. One of the bolts was heading toward the Rangers' Zords, and the other was heading for Harry and Tommy. Before the two Rangers had a chance to blink, they found themselves wrapped in lightning, sparks showering off their suits like a waterfall, even as pain, dulled though it was by those same suits, lit up their nervous systems like never before. Harry screamed. Tommy screamed. There was little else they could do until they blacked out. Coming back to consciousness was an ordeal the likes of which Harry hadn't felt since his days back at Hogwarts. Back in first year and second year, third year, heck, every year that he had some big end-of-year challenge to overcome that left him physically and magically exhausted, so every year he was at Hogwarts. He really should have looked into alternate education. In any case, fighting his way back to consciousness, Harry noticed 3 things immediately. 1, he was outside. 2, he was out of morph. And 3, he appeared to be alone. Opening his eyes to find the darkening blue sky showing that the day was waning, Harry found himself struggling to even sit up. He wasn't restrained or anything, or at least not by anything he could feel, he was just that exhausted. And he hurt. Oh Merlin, did he hurt. Every nerve cluster in his body was protesting at once, leaving Harry feeling like little more than a solid ache. Finally, he was able to force himself into a sitting position and looked around to find himself back in Angel Grove Park. More specifically, he was in the open area in front of the stage set up for the Power Rangers Day Festival. As he looked around, his attention was caught by a groan behind him. His first instinct was to spin quickly, but his body was still protesting such movement, so his eventual, scooting turnaround onto his stomach was much slower than he might have liked. What he found, thankfully, wasn't anything threatening, which would have been the icing on the cake that the day had become. Instead, he found the other 6 Rangers, all lying prone in the grass as he had been. The groan had come from Tommy, who was shifting slightly where he lay 5 or so feet away from Harry. A bit more looking identified Jason as being the next closest, lying off to Tommy's left with the rest of the Rangers spread nearby. Shrugging mentally, mostly since he felt the physical act would be more painful than it was worth, Harry pointed a finger toward Jason and sent a jet of water his way. The Red Ranger shot up into a sitting position, sputtering and cursing as he went. "Jason," Harry croaked, more than a bit surprised at how weak his voice was. "Rise and shine, Jason." Jason shook himself once more, sending water flying, before turning to face the wizard. "Harry? What the heck, man?" Harry smiled weakly. "Sorry, but I figured it was better to wake you up rather than waiting, and I don't know that I can make it over to you right now. I can't even tell you how much I hurt." Jason cursed quietly before standing, still trying to shake water of himself as he did. "What happened?" Harry groaned as he slumped back to the ground, lying on his stomach this time. "I honestly have no idea. The last thing I remember is Cyclops zapping Tommy and then I woke up here." Jason nodded, closing his eyes briefly. "I remember that, and then there was a flash of light. We might have been teleported after that, I don't know." Harry sighed. "I dunno either, maybe one of the others noticed something else." Harry and Jason exchanged a glance before Jason nodded and moved to wake up the others. Luckily the other Rangers woke up easily enough and nobody else had to get woken by Harry. Almost as soon as she woke up, Trini was at Harry's side, helping him roll over again and move back into a sitting position. Kimberly was doing much the same thing for Tommy, talking to him softly as the Green Ranger coped with his own case of full-body ache. "So did anyone notice anything? Does anyone have any idea what happened?" Jason asked after explaining the situation to the revived Rangers. There was a general head shaking from the Rangers, save for Trini. The Yellow Ranger blushed for a moment before speaking. "It was Harry. He and Tommy were getting shocked and then he did something and Cyclops stopped moving. Then the Mega Dragonzord shut down and I blacked out." The Rangers shifted their gazes to Harry, who just shrugged, wincing afterwards as his body protested. "I have no idea, honestly. If I did do something, it wasn't intentional." He paused for a moment before continuing. "It's possible my magic reacted to protect me. Sort of an instinctual thing." The Rangers were all silent for a bit at that, their minds racing. Finally, Jason took charge again. "What matters now is what we're gonna do next. I say we get in touch with the command center." Seeing his teammates nodding, Jason lifted his communicator. "Jason to command center." The communicator merely let off a 2-tone beep. "Alpha Zordon, anyone?" It seems that the communicators are unable to establish a stable connection. Billy said, fiddling with his own communicator. It's quite likely that Rita jammed them. Okay, Zack said with a nod. So we can't get a hold of anyone back at the command center. What about teleportation? Billy immediately vetoed this idea too, looking up from his communicator with a sigh of resignation. The communicators can't seem to connect to the grid either, which makes teleportation impossible. Do you think Rita is behind that too? Kimberly asked while crouched next to Tommy, practically holding her boyfriend in his sitting position. The Green Ranger seemed to be somewhat worse off than Harry, most likely because of Harry's magic protecting him on top of his suit. Though Tommy's waning power probably had something to do with it too. Billy just shrugged helplessly. I suppose it's possible, but I'm not really an expert on magic. When everyone turned to Harry, he shook his head slowly. It might be possible, but I'm not really an expert on grid magic myself. We'd have to ask Zordon to be sure. Which we can't do right now because the communicators aren't working. Zack sighed, turning and walking off a few steps before freezing. Guys, the unease in Zack's voice caught everyone's attention immediately. Billy and Jason ran to the Black Ranger's side immediately while Trini stayed to help Harry stand, not an easy challenge with his entire body protesting the entire time, and Kimberly stayed near the still largely immobile Tommy. When they reached Zack's side, Harry noticed what had caught the Ranger so off guard. Where they had woken up, there were several large trees blocking their view of the city proper. Zack had moved off to the side far enough to have a clear view of the buildings that made up Angel Grove, and as a consequence, he could see Cyclopses standing there like a sentinel of terror. None of them breathed for several seconds, almost as if waiting for the massive War Zord to make a move. When it didn't, they relaxed a bit. What's going on? Jason asked. Why is it just standing there? I have no idea, Zack responded, shaking his head as he did. Maybe it was whatever Harry did? Trini suggested, squeezing Harry's shoulders slightly. Maybe he took it out of commission. Harry thought for a moment before responding. It's not unlikely. I told you all that my magic reacts poorly with technology most of the time. If whatever Trini saw really was my magic lashing out to protect me, it might have fried Cyclopses' circuits. That's probably the best news I've had all day. What are you guys seeing over there? Tommy called out weakly, bringing everyone's attention back to the downed Ranger and his girlfriend. After explaining the situation to them, they both seemed to relax a bit as well. So we might have a bit of time then? Kimberly asked, her usual perky smile starting to show itself again. Harry nodded. We might. At the very least, they'd have to repair or replace whatever was damaged. I can't really think of any other reason for Cyclopses to not be leveling the city right now. Or at least looking around for us. Yeah, Jason commented suddenly. That is a bit strange, isn't it? I mean, why hasn't anyone found us yet? We aren't exactly undercover right now. Jason, Zack said, putting a hand on his shoulder. This may be one of those don't look a gift horse in the mouth situations. Jason nodded slowly, though his eyes still betrayed his worry. Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking, you know? I think we all are, Jason. Harry said. I don't know about before I showed up, but I don't think we've ever lost that badly before. Billy and the girls nodded, but it was Tommy who spoke. Yeah, we really underestimated Cyclopses in that last battle. He was way too fast for the Mega Dragon Zord to handle and he cut down Hedwig like she was nothing. Harry's eyes widened as he tensed up at the reminder of his familiar. Trini, feeling him tense, gave his shoulders another squeeze. Harry, she asked, looking at him curiously. The Magi Ranger was lost in his mind, however, reaching out through his familiar bond to try and discover what happened to Hedwig. After several tense moments, he felt a ping of consciousness and heard his companion's voice over their connection. I am safe, Harry/Wizard. Big Head moved the robot lizards and I to the Zord hangar. We are recharging. My wing is back, but I will still be unable to battle again for some time. Harry just smiled as he responded mentally. No worries, Hedwig. I'm just glad you're okay. Hedwig sent him a feeling of satisfaction. Before the link faded again, Harry refocused his eyes on the others before speaking. I was talking to Hedwig. She said she's alright. Zordon teleported her and the other Zords to the hangar and they're recharging as we speak. Well, that's one bit of good news. Trini said, resting her head on his shoulder, though careful not to put too much weight on him in fear of pushing him over. But it still leaves us with the question of how to get to the command center. Jason said firmly, his game face once more in place. Right. The other Rangers chanted, prompting a soft sigh from Harry. Billy hummed in thought. Well, if we can get to my garage, I might be able to alter the modulation of the frequency capacitors in my communicator. That may allow us to work around whatever Rita's doing to block us and allow us to teleport again. And if that fails, there's always the rad bug. Harry raised an eyebrow. Billy, he started. I don't know if you've noticed, but the rad bug only seats 5, right? And there are 7 of us. So how are we all gonna fit in there? Zach's smirk lit up his face almost instantly. No worries, Harry. I'm sure Trini and Kimberly can double up with you and Tommy, right? The 4 mentioned rangers' faces all lit up in blushes almost simultaneously while the other 3 chuckled good-naturedly. It was something they all needed, a bit of light-heartedness to distract them from how deep they were. And then any plan and good mood they had was thrown out the window by a whirring noise from overhead. Almost as one, the 7 rangers looked up in time to see Rita's flying bicycle being ridden by Babu. It was hovering overhead and the blue monkey riding it was staring directly at them. Aha! Babu cheered. I found you rangers. Your evilness. I found them in the park. The response to Babu's shout was almost immediate as the rangers found themselves surrounded by a horde of putty patrollers. Their high-pitched mumbling nearly loud enough to drown out thought as they hopped and twitched around the perimeter. Harry pulled his wand quickly, groaning slightly as his body protested the fast movement, even as the 5 core rangers formed up in a circle around he and Tommy. And then Golder teleported down. Rangers, I was wondering where you ran off to. I think it's time we finish our fight once and for all. Jason, Harry hissed to the rangers' leader. If I may, I suggest no holding back in this fight. The Red Ranger seemed confused for a moment before his eyes widened with understanding. Yeah, I think that may be a good idea. All right guys, it's morphin' time. As one, the core rangers pulled their morphers and moved them forward. Mastodon. Pterodactyl. Triceratops. Saber-toothed tiger. Tyrannosaurus. Nothing happened. There was no flash of light, no spandex-looking suits, no power weapons, just nothing. The rangers couldn't morph. Golder merely laughed. And now you see the true depth of the danger you are now in, rangers, the armored simian mocked them. My Empress has cut off your power coins from the grid and you are unable to access the power as a result. This means that you can't morph. Bwahahaha. Guys, Zach asked as the circle of putties began pacing closer to them. Any ideas? Harry closed his eyes briefly, reaching within himself to check his magic. Surprisingly enough, he still had more than half of his reserves left. Although his grid power was nearly depleted, which took morphing off the table for him as well, even if only for the moment, he still might be able to do something to help them. Transfiguring walls would only stall the putties and Golder for a few moments, not to mention trapping the rangers within them at the same time. They couldn't really run, mostly since he knew he wasn't up for that much physical activity, and if he wasn't then Tommy, who still hadn't been able to stand, definitely wasn't. If only they hadn't been cut off from teleportation. Wait, duh. Hey guys, I may have an idea. Harry said as quietly as he could, his eyes darting around as he searched for something suitable for his plan. Rita may have blocked our teleportation, but I doubt she blocked any forms of magical transportation. Trini and Kimberly shot him disgruntled looks even before immediately returning their eyes to the approaching horde. No way, Harry, Kimberly hissed. You cannot be serious. Trini was a bit more thoughtful though. His little popping teleportation thing might be our only way out, Kim, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Finally, Harry spotted a stone that would serve his purpose. It was about 5 inches in diameter and mostly circular and flat. It was probably a landscaping stone that had gotten thrown by a kid from one of the flower beds that dotted the park, but Harry didn't particularly care as he summoned it to his hand. I couldn't take all of you at once if I did apparate, and taking one of you each time would be too taxing on my in my current condition, not to mention that Golder wouldn't let us get away with that, so that's off the table anyway. I was thinking of a portkey. Harry replied, holding the stone out and downward so that Tommy could reach it. Now when I give the word, I need everyone to touch the stone I'm holding. Even just a finger will do. I am going to enjoy your end, Rangers. Golder was still mocking as he paced with the putty horde. The entire group was only 15 or so feet from them on all sides now. It was rather amusing the amount of coordination that was being put into the attack, especially since the putties were largely brain dead, which could only make it harder. Are you serious, Harry? Zach whispered, turning his head slightly and catching sight of the stone in question. A rock? What the heck kind of good is a rock gonna do? How's that gonna help us escape? Magic, Zach. Harry hissed back. Just trust me, will ya? Jason shrugged, his eyes staying firmly on Golder who was approaching directly in front of him. We don't have any other choice. Whenever you're ready, Harry. Yeah, Kimberly interjected. And the sooner the better. All right, I just need to focus for a second. He wasn't the most practiced in making portkeys. Yes, he had used one against Tommy back when he first broke into the command center while still under Rita's control, but that was just for one person, so it wasn't as difficult. This one had to be able to safely transport 7 people, 2 of which were injured, which made it a bit more delicate of an operation. 10 feet away. Narrowing his eyes, Harry focused on the command center, right in the center of the ring of computers, and summoned up his magic. He tapped the stone with his wand, smiling in satisfaction when it glowed blue briefly, signifying the successful creation of a portkey. "All right guys, now!" Harry shouted, noting that the putties and Golder were nearly upon them. As one, the Rangers spun and grabbed the portkey stone, vanishing just as Golder's sword, as well as the sword arms of many putty patrollers, passed through the air where they had just been. One moment the command center was relatively normal. The computers were beeping, lights were flashing, and Alpha was panicking as he waddle ran from one computer station to the next, pushing a few buttons at each before moving on to the next one. The next moment, the Power Rangers appeared from thin air. Only a slight swirl disturbing their image before they solidified a heartbeat later. 6 of the 7 were standing strong in the instant after they appeared, while Tommy was sitting on the ground, mostly leaning against Kimberly. Then Harry fell to the ground in a heap. "DMN it," Harry cursed, accepting Trini's help to stand again. "Man, Harry," Zach said with a smile, his good humor returning now that they were out of immediate danger. "Either you're really in bad shape or that portkey thing took more out of you than we thought it would if you're falling down and we aren't." Harry sighed. "Unfortunately, Zach, falling down after a portkey trip is about normal for me. I just can't get the hang of the stupid things." "Rangers." Zordon's voice interrupted Harry's grumbling. For once, the ancient wizard sounded surprised, but happy at the same time. "It is very good to see you all alive and well. When we lost contact with you after teleporting you out and recalling the Zords, Alpha and I feared the worst." "You teleported us to the park?" Jason asked, stepping to the front of the group as was his tendency. "Why didn't you just bring us back here?" Zordon let out a sigh. "That was my intention, however Rita cast a spell around Angel Grove that prevented it from happening. I was forced to redirect you all to the park and hope you would be able to find your own way back here." "Well, we almost didn't," Zach said, patting Harry's shoulder. "If it weren't for Harry and his magic, we would have been sliced and diced by Golder and some putties in the park." "Well done then, Harry." Zordon praised the now blushing Magi Ranger. "Your quick thinking not only saved the lives of yourself and your teammates, but may well have given the world a further fighting chance." "But how can we beat Cyclopsis, Zordon?" Kimberly asked, stepping away from Tommy briefly as she spoke. "That thing is way too fast for the Mega Dragonzord and it stood up to our strongest attack without even a blemish." "It is true that Cyclopsis is powerful, Kimberly," Zordon responded, nodding grimly. "Especially now that Rita has combined it with Loker's power, but all is not lost. Because Rita's palace is on Earth now, she is more powerful than before, but she is also more vulnerable at the same time." "What do you mean, Zordon?" Tommy asked, drawing attention to him and bringing Alpha forward with his usual litany of devices and scanners to be waved about the injured ranger. Zordon continued, ignoring his assistant's actions, though Harry was able to see the concern in his eyes. "Alpha has been able to access Rita's own computer systems with ours. He has used this connection to discover valuable information on Cyclopsis and Rita's plans." "Rita got hacked by Alpha?" Zachnir shouted in surprise before turning to the android. "Way to go, dude." Alpha tilted his head in confusion for a moment before nodding and turning back to his scans of Tommy. "It was nothing, Zach. Rita's security system on her computer was easy to bypass now that she's so close." Usually, Alpha would have been acting shy after the Ranger's praise, but Harry supposed that the robot's focus on Tommy preempted his typical attitude. Yes, he was able to recover that information and more, but the discovery about Cyclopsis is what is important now. Zordon continued, smiling as he did. He has discovered that Cyclopsis has an adaptive AI system that works with the pilot to help it adapt to whatever enemy it is fighting. That is why Cyclopsis was so fast after it was reconstructed by Loker. The AI system came to the conclusion that more speed was needed to overpower the large and slow Mega Dragonzord, and so it diverted more power to make it so. "So how are we going to overcome such an AI, Zordon?" Billy asked, his eyes dancing at the borderline technical talk going on. "I suspect that if you switch the modes of your Zords frequently, then Cyclopsis's AI system will be unable to react fast enough, giving you the upper hand in battle. Rita's files indicate that it may freeze up, allowing you to take the advantage and destroy it again. But will we have the firepower without Titanus?" Kimberly asked, her face unusually grim. Zordon merely nodded. "I understand your concern, Kimberly. Titanus is beyond our reach at the moment, but it is possible to free him. It will just take time. Yeah, Trini said sadly, leaning into Harry as she did, prompting him to wrap an arm around her shoulders. Time we don't really have. On the contrary, Zordon responded with another smile. Harry's reaction to Cyclops's attack was able to short out a significant portion of the War Zord's internal systems. It will take several hours for repairs to be made, certainly not before tomorrow morning, which coincides nicely with the estimated time for the Zords to be fully recharged. Harry scoffed internally. If he didn't know any better, he would think that such a coincidence was planned by the grid. So we've got another chance to take that freak down tomorrow then, Jason said with a determined look on his face. Yes, Jason, Zordon replied. And once Cyclopsis has been defeated, a significant portion of Rita's power will be lost. She has tied up much of her available resources in the War Zord, and its destruction will leave her weakened enough for me to break through her dimensional prison and free all the people of Angel Grove. And then we can take that space witch down. Zack cheered, bringing a smile to the other Rangers' faces. Zordon merely hummed, however, not voicing his agreement or disagreement, but Harry did notice he had taken on a thoughtful look. Zordon was generally against offensive action, Harry knew, but maybe, just maybe, the old wizard was changing his stance a bit. That might be enough to end this war sooner rather than later. But for now, it was better to focus on the present instead of some ephemeral future. So, what's the plan then, Zordon? Harry asked. Zordon smiled at his apprentice. For now, Harry, I suggest you all get comfortable. It isn't safe for any of you to go home at this time, so your only option may be staying in the command center for tonight. I will spend the night firming up ideas to give us the greatest possible advantage in our fight tomorrow. The Rangers seemed a bit taken aback for the moment, but, one by one, saw the wisdom in Zordon's suggestion. Besides the fact that going home to an empty house would only serve to remind them of the situation their families were in, if Rita were to find them at their house, unprotected and asleep, there was no telling what she'd do to them. Heck, killing them and or destroying the house was probably the least of things she could think of. Harry winced internally. He was still sleeping in the command center every night anyway, and that still wasn't something he wanted to share with his teammates. It was like the cupboard under the stairs, he was embarrassed at his sleeping arrangements at the Dursleys and so hadn't told anyone at Hogwarts about it. Yeah, Hermione had figured it out and he assumed McGonagall and Dumbledore had known anyway, but he had never expressly told anyone. He would just have to take steps to hide his sleeping arrangements from the others and hope for the best. The conversation mostly broke down at that point. The Rangers milled around a bit, Kimberly and Trini sticking close to their boyfriends while Alpha continued scanning Tommy while Billy watched. Jason and Zack paced restlessly until Zordon suggested they try to sleep and teleported in two of the cots that seemed to be the go-to sleeping arrangement for the command center. After Harry placed the cots under a silencing charm, the two Rangers did what they could to fall asleep, though were unable until Harry took pity on them and cast a mild sleeping charm their way. Tommy was declared physically fit, if sore and weak, and was put to bed in his own cot shortly afterward. The girls weakly protested sleeping in the same room as they guys, though couldn't think of an alternative until Harry vanished into his workroom/bedroom and shrank his desk, trunk, and disillusioned cot, pocketing the last. Trini and Kimberly immediately accepted the room on offer, Trini giving him a kiss on the cheek in thanks, and fell asleep under the influence of another spell almost immediately. By the time that was taken care of, Billy had followed the lead of the others and was snoring away on his own cot, prompting Harry to give him his own silencing charm to avoid him waking everyone else, leaving Harry the only Ranger still conscious. So tell me, Zordon, the Magi Ranger prompted. What kind of chances do we really have? Zordon sighed as he stared at his apprentice, as if weighing him with his eyes. Finally, he spoke again. I'm afraid, Harry, that as things are, the chances aren't good. Even fully charged and switching modes frequently, the Dinozords and Dragonzords stand little chance against Cyclopsis without Titanus and the Ultrazord as backup. Rita has trapped Titanus underneath Angel Grove in much the same way she trapped the Megazord while Tommy was under her control. And this isn't even taking into account how dangerously low Tommy's powers have been drained after taking a direct attack from Cyclopsis. Harry's eyes narrowed. Then what was the point of all that earlier? Why didn't you just tell us that in the first place? Zordon gave him a wry look. Because, Harry, aside from not wanting to break their spirit, we have little other choice than to try. Besides, there is a way to obtain the power we will need, and you are key to it. What do you mean? Zordon smiled. You are able to access the grid, Harry, and have shown an amazing aptitude for channeling that power. My plan involves me using my own power to support Tommy's failing power coin. This will allow the Dragonzord to function at its full capabilities, which will give it an extra edge it didn't have earlier. And what will I be doing? I assume I'll be fusing with Hedwig for the battle, right? Zordon sighed. Unfortunately, Harry, Hedwig was more seriously damaged than the other Zords in Cyclopsis's last attack. She will be unable to join the battle tomorrow. I expect her to be recharging and recovering for several more days, to be honest. No, you shall be doing the same as I. Just as I once did for you and will be doing for Tommy tomorrow, you will be channeling extra grid power to the other Rangers to help empower the Dinozords. I intend for you to act similarly to Cyclopsis's AI system, directing more power where it is needed to counteract anything sent your way. Wait, I'm gonna what? Harry exclaimed, quite glad for the silencing charms preventing him from waking the others. There is no other choice, Harry. Your power as the Magi Ranger isn't directly compatible with the other Rangers' mighty Morphin power, and without a Zord you will be largely unable to contribute directly to the battle to come. The only way you will be able to help them at this point is by enhancing their Zords with pure grid energy. It is not a difficult exercise to perform, indeed you already have all the knowledge to do so. It is just a matter of applying it. Harry went silent after that, considering what Zordon had told him. His mentor had a point. Without Hedwig, he really wouldn't be able to do much against Cyclopsis. His track record at fighting against giant enemies hadn't been the best thus far, so the proposal did make a certain amount of sense. But still, Zordon was suggesting something far beyond his level of experience, not to mention comfort. All the same though. Harry sighed. Alright, Zordon. If you're sure that's our only option, then I suppose I have no choice but to follow your lead. Zordon smiled. Do not worry, Harry. The grid will help guide you through the exercise just as it has for everything else so far. If you have faith in yourself, your abilities, and the other Rangers, we cannot help but succeed tomorrow. While the battle is going on, Alpha will be directing the command center's computers to try and free Titanus from where Rita has trapped him. Hopefully, the information from Rita's database will make such a task easier for him. Zordon looked thoughtful for a moment before shaking his head slightly. In the meantime, Harry, I suggest you get some sleep. I shall instruct you on the specifics of the process in the morning before the battle. Harry just nodded, a blank look on his face as he tried to process everything. Making his way over to the others, Harry retrieved his cot from his pocket and expanded it before laying down. It took him a few hours before he was able to drop into a restless sleep. For Harry Potter, morning came all too early. He had spent far too much time throughout the nighttime hours tossing and turning, his mind racing over what Zordon had told him would be happening the next day. Over how much of the pressure would be on him to get this new exercise right. The consequences of failure would be dire for himself, his teammates, and the world in general. Fighting against Voldemort somehow paled in comparison to the pressure he was feeling at that moment. It might have just been the difference between memory and the present, or the general scale of things, but Harry was finding the pressure a lot more difficult to endure now. Maybe it was because, technically, he wasn't going to be on the front lines with his fellow Rangers. The way Zordon spoke of what he would have Harry doing and the severe lack of real detail on that aspect was causing its own element of tension, brought to mind the image of Harry remaining behind in the command center while the others went to fight without him. He had never really been good at sitting out battles when he felt he needed to be there. He had been involved in the fight against Cyclopsis when it began, and when things went wrong, the thought of not being there in person at the end just rubbed him the wrong way. Or maybe he was just nervous. In any case, Harry didn't look nearly as rested as the other Rangers by the time they all roused themselves the morning after their disastrous first round with the Loker-empowered Cyclopsis. It was something that all his teammates noticed, though none commented on it beyond Trini hugging him a bit tighter than normal in greeting. This was most likely because they all had their own worries on their minds. While Harry's sleep spells had enabled the others to rest well, too bad he couldn't have done the same to himself, it was clear that their minds immediately returned to the matter at hand once they regained full consciousness. So, Zordon, Jason asked, his face as grim as it usually was when discussing Power Ranger business. What's the plan? Did you come up with anything other than switching our Zord combinations frequently? Zordon nodded, humming in confirmation. Indeed, Jason. Alpha's scans of Tommy reported that his power is critically low. No matter what we do, today will likely be the Green Ranger's final battle. Everyone's eyes went to Tommy, including Harry, who had been told this the night before, even if not in the same words. Their faces were grim, fear warring with concern as they looked to their depowered teammate. Tommy, however, looked resolute. I'll do whatever it takes. Even if it costs me my powers or my life, I'll fight Rita to the last. Kimberly buried her face into Tommy's chest, wrapping her arms around him as tightly as she could even as Zordon spoke again. I do not think it will come to that, Tommy. I wouldn't ask you to put yourself at such risk if there was another option, and if you were to morph with your powers as they are now they would fail within minutes, even outside of combat, leaving you completely vulnerable. No, I intend to bolster your power with my own, preventing such failure, so that you may fight once more at your full capability, even if it is for the last time. Everyone's faces relaxed a bit. With Tommy able to fight at full power, and thus the entire Mighty Morphin team together, they all felt a bit better than before. Tommy just nodded, smiling now. I'm ready when you are, Zordon. Zordon nodded back before speaking. I'm afraid that it is not yet time for the battle. We still have a few hours before Cyclopsis and the Dinozords and Dragonzord are ready for battle. In addition, there is more to the plan that you have not yet been told. What more can there be to it, Zordon? Zack asked, his perpetual good mood already making a full reappearance. We morph, call the Zords, and then we'll keep switching combinations to throw off Cyclopsis's computers before finishing it off with the Mega Dragonzord and Hedwig in her warrior mode. Hedwig can help keep Cyclopsis distracted so it doesn't scrap us in mid-change, and once the AI freezes up we should be good to go, right? There is one large flaw in your plan, Zack. Zordon replied grimly, frowning slightly as his eyes flicked to Harry. Hedwig will not be available for the battle to come. Indeed, as I told Harry already, I doubt the Silver Owl Zord will be ready for combat again for several more days. As such, Harry will be staying here in the command center. So we're gonna be fighting alone? Jason asked, his arms crossed and his forehead creased, clearly unhappy with this latest revelation. A month or two ago, Jason would have immediately rounded on Harry and blamed him for staying out of the fight, despite Zordon being the one to call for it, so Harry figured this was something of an improvement at the very least. Not at all, Jason. Zordon said, shaking his head as he did so. Just as I will be supporting Tommy's flagging power, Harry will be utilizing a technique to empower the rest of you, specifically your Zords, to help negate any advantage Cyclopsis's AI has over the Megazord combinations. Everyone's gazes shifted to Harry now and the Magi Ranger found himself shifting a bit under the scrutiny. After a moment, Jason turned back to Zordon. How is that going to work? Zordon hummed in thought for a moment. I intend to have Harry connect with your power coin, Jason. As the leader of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and the pilot of the Tyrannosaurus Dinozord, you are central to the balance of your team and its connection to the grid. Through this connection, Harry will feed grid power into your Dinozord, and from there to the others once you form the Megazord. At the same time, Harry's consciousness will follow along with the Zords and he will be able to add his own will to them, providing an intelligence much like that in the Dragonzord. So Harry will be controlling our Dinozords? Trini asked, shooting her boyfriend a raised eyebrow to which he shrugged. Zordon paused briefly before responding. In a manner of speaking, yes. He will be able to exert a certain amount of control over them, but it should not be beyond what you do as their pilots. It is more like he will be aiding the Zords in combat, helping them process commands faster and so increase their reaction time and overall speed. This isn't even mentioning the increase in power, which will make the Zords that much more devastating. You don't sound very sure about this, Zordon, Zack pointed out, tilting his head slightly as he spoke. Zordon sighed. In truth, Zack, I am not. There is a chance that Harry's own magic will cause the technique to behave differently than expected. With only grid power though, everything should happen as I have described. Jason didn't seem to like this answer if his stance and expression was anything to go by. It was something Harry could understand since Jason was the primary pilot of the Zord combinations save the Dragonzord battle mode and the two hadn't exactly been on the best of terms despite the relatively calm PRD they were going through now. Still, Jason seemed at least grudgingly accepting of the situation. He didn't lash out at anything at least, which was probably as much as Harry could expect. Zack, as was the norm, broke the growing tension around Jason with his next comment, his eyes going wide as a thought occurred to him. So, with Harry boosting our Zords, does that mean that we will be able to use magic like him? Or at least through the Megazord or something? Man, wouldn't that be a surprise for Golder? Zack jabbed one arm forward as if holding a wand. Alakazam. Cyclopsis is now a newt. And now Power Sword. No getting better for you. There were a few weak chuckles from the other Rangers, including from Jason. Even Zordon laughed a bit before speaking. Unfortunately, Zack, aside from the general incompatibility between Harry's branch of the power and that used by the rest of you, Harry will be unable to channel his own brand of magic into the Zords during this battle. If it becomes necessary in the future, it is possible that he could be able to do so with more experience in channeling grid power alongside his own magic, but for now it is unlikely. Zack's face was almost comical as it drooped, bringing another round of weak laughter. Finally, he spoke again. Oh well, at least he can still help us turn Cyclopsis into a pile of scrap and save our city. The others all nodded in response to Zach's declaration, but Jason merely turned and stared into Harry's eyes. Once by one, the Rangers noticed the stare down and grew silent. Even Zordon refrained from speaking as the Red Ranger and Magi Ranger matched gazes. Finally, Jason spoke. "Can you do this, Harry? Is this going to work out, or do we need to find another way?" Harry kept his eyes locked on Jason's even as he shrugged in response. "I honestly don't know. I've not done anything like this before personally. Zordon did boost my power while you guys were trapped on the Island of Illusion, so I have some experience with it from the other side. But Zordon says that I'll be able to pull it off. He told me that it is a combination of a few exercises I've already learned, so I'm not working from scratch here. I don't know for sure if it will work, but I'm willing to try my best to make it happen." Jason seemed a bit irritated by Harry's unsure response at first, but by the end of it, he was, if not smiling, at least less grim than he had been. "All right then, if Zordon thinks it'll work then I'm all for it." Jason came a step closer to Harry and held out his hand, palm down. Almost immediately, Zach and Billy stepped up and put their own hands on top of Jason's, followed by Kimberly, Tommy and Trini. Harry hesitated only a moment before resting his hand atop Trini's. Jason met each of their eyes. "We're in this together, guys. If we stick together like we always have, stick to the plan Zordon came up with, we can't lose." Harry could feel the grid power sneaking its way into his mind and body, but forced himself not to react. Somehow, he felt that not going along with whatever ridiculous and corny thing that was about to happen would ruin any goodwill he had gotten from Jason with his response to the Red Ranger's question. "We are going to do this. We are going to save Angel Grove. We are going to save the world." A mere second after Jason finished speaking, the 7 Rangers collectively flung their arms into the air, hopping slightly so that they all ended up in the air at the same time, each with an arm extended above them. Power Rangers. Harry felt a small bit of himself cringe deep inside. Once the team bonding was concluded, Zordon indicated that it was time to make final preparations. What this consisted of was Harry breaking out the last of his stored food, mostly cereal to be honest, and having breakfast with his fellow Power Rangers. Not many of them had much in the way of an appetite, but they all ate all the same, Zordon advising them that they would need the energy for the battle ahead. After that, they all had to find something to occupy themselves with while Zordon guided Harry through what he would have to do to link with Jason's power coin. In truth, it was a fairly simple technique. Especially since Zordon would basically be doing all the work for him. All Harry had to do was connect himself to the grid and then let go, and Zordon would do the rest. The actual method was far more complex than that, of course, but to learn it all himself would take Harry many more years of study. It was far simpler for Harry to just let Zordon take him where he needed to be and then just keep himself there until the Rangers called on the power when they morphed. That would pull his consciousness back into reality, riding piggyback on Jason's morph and then his Dinozord. From there, Zordon had only the vaguest of ideas as to what would happen, saying that it was different for every grid magic user in each separate situation. And again, that was without taking into account the possible effect of Harry's own magic. Not the most effective of reassurances, but it was more than Harry had worked with many times in the past. At least he had some kind of information to work off of. After the quick crash course, Harry found himself sitting next to Trini on a conjured couch against one of the command center's black walls. The Yellow Ranger had tucked herself into Harry's side, his arm draped over her shoulders and her head on his shoulder. They were talking with Kimberly and Tommy, who were sitting in a similar position on another couch a few feet in front of them. "So," Kimberly asked, "what are you guys gonna do once this is over and everyone is back?" Trini and Harry exchanged a glance briefly before shrugging almost simultaneously, which sent Kimberly into a giggling fit. "I don't know," Trini responded once her friend had calmed down. "I think I might just want to take a nap after all this stress. It'll be good to just relax for a while." "Yeah," Tommy agreed while Kimberly nodded. "I don't know about you guys, but after last night I still feel like I could sleep for a week." Harry shook his head, a grin stretching its way across his face. "Oh, but you can't just go to sleep, you guys." Kimberly saw the look on his face and let out a small groan of annoyance. "Why's that, Harry?" she finally asked, looking like she was already dreading his answer. Harry's grin only grew as he met her eyes. "You all have to put in an appearance at the Power Rangers Day festival that you guys were all so excited about yesterday. I doubt that it'll be cancelled just because everyone was taken captive overnight. Heck, the way things work around this city, I wouldn't be surprised if it was extended to last a week after the mighty Morphin Power Rangers once again save the city and all its citizens from evil." The group groan from the other 3 Rangers caught the attention of Jason, Billy, and Zach. When they made their way over and had Harry's comment explained to them, they groaned too. "Man, I don't even want to think about that now. We should have known that Rita would have attacked. Harry cleared his throat, but said nothing, merely smiling at Zack and making him wince and groan again. All right, Zack finally said. We should have listened to Harry long before we actually did and should have prepared for something like this ahead of time. Harry shook his head, still smiling. Well, you can't always live in paranoia like that, Zack. I knew a guy back in my old world like that. He wasn't really a pleasant person to be around. Hell of a good fighter and always good to have at your back, but not really pleasant. Harry's right, Jason said, either not noticing or ignoring Harry's look of surprise, comical and overdone as it was. We couldn't have known something bad was going to happen, but we should have been more suspicious, maybe not to the extent Harry was, since he was practically sucking the fun out of the entire experience, but... Harry nodded in acknowledgement of Jason's joke as his teammates laughed. He could take a joke at his expense if it meant boosting up the others' spirits. They would need all the confidence they could get before too long. The alarms of the command center made Harry rethink his opinion. They would need the confidence now. Rangers, Zordon said as the seven scrambled away from Harry's conjured furniture and back to the center of the computer ring. It is time. Our sensors have indicated that Cyclopsis is nearing reactivation. Similarly, the Zords are now ready for battle once again. Zordon then turned his focus onto Harry alone. Harry, my apprentice, it is time for your greatest challenge yet. Are you prepared? Harry took a deep breath, smiling at Trini when she squeezed his hand in support. As ready as I'll ever be, Zordon. Zordon nodded even as a cot was teleported into the command center in front of Harry. Good, the first thing you will need to do is to bring yourself directly to the grid. The method I am going to teach you is what I use when I need to commune with the grid. Nodding once more and shooting a quick smile to the other Rangers, Harry settled down on the cot and closed his eyes, listening as Zordon's voice guided him. I want you to reach deep within yourself, Harry. Reach for the power within you. The access you have been given to the grid. Tell me when you've found it. This was how many of their meditation and training sessions would start. This part of it, establishing his connection to the grid, typically to draw on its power, Harry could almost do in his sleep, but Zordon was of the opinion that it was always good to get back to basics when starting something new. Zordon's voice took on a slightly droning, yet rhythmic quality that helped Harry distance himself from the physical world and reach within without dropping himself into the world of his occlumency mindscape. Such an action would actually serve to block him from the grid, as he hadn't designed his mental shields with them in mind. Instead, Harry found himself just drifting on the waves of his own magic, each second bringing him closer to the mode of difference that was the grid power within him. It took him only seconds until he was there. I've got it, Zordon. Good, the wizard intoned, his voice still light. Now, I want you to reach into the power. Reach through the power and find yourself in the morphing grid itself. Harry hesitated only briefly. This was definitely new, and was probably the first point of potential failure simply because of that. All the same, Harry found it surprisingly easy to slip his mental presence into the mode of light and into the morphing grid. All at once, Harry found himself a tiny being in a massive ocean of pure power. Just like when he had come to find out what had happened to Zordon and had ended up with powers of his own, Harry found himself nearly lost in the enormity that was the consciousness of the morphing grid. Although this time he was slightly more prepared for it by experience and training, and felt, so long as the grid didn't get as active as it was the last time he had communed with it, he would be able to hold himself together. Young Harry. It is good to see you again. The grid's voice echoed everywhere around Harry, and he found himself cringing even as he did what he could to cover his metaphorical ears in an attempt to deaden the painful sound. And good to see that you still practically announce all your thoughts to everyone around you when you're outside your mental barriers. The grid's voice was quieter, but was now tinged with amusement. I do apologize for that, but I am quite excited, you see. The battle today promises to be most entertaining and I am quite looking forward to it. Harry waved off the grid's apology before responding. Not a problem, though I'm sure that the people Rita has taken hostage might find issue with your attitude. They probably aren't too happy about being trapped, you know. The grid's presence seemed to frown briefly, its exuberance dimming a bit. Yes, I do believe Rita has gone a bit too far this time. It's one thing to try and control one of my focal points, everyone involved in this conflict does, but to explicitly attack those that live around the focal points, those that I actively protect, no, I do believe that she has gone too far this time. Harry found himself slightly surprised by the grid's reaction, not to mention its words. Was this the same being that had expressed a preference for balance? It really appeared to be taking a side in the battle to come. The grid sensed Harry's thoughts, of course, and responded in kind. It is not terribly uncommon for me to have favorites in different battles, young Harry. Indeed, Zordon has always been a favorite of mine and so tends to get more support from me than others he would call allies. Similarly, certain individuals on the other side of the conflict have more favor from me than others. Just as I said before, it's all about balance. Rita will almost undoubtedly lose some of her personal favor with her most recent actions, but that means that someone else on her side of the battle will gain or someone else on your side will lose in kind. The grid's feel became darker, angrier before it spoke again. In this case, Rita Repulsa has directly attacked those that I choose to protect. She has used the power granted to her to take that which I value, that which allows me to express myself in your plane of existence, and that I will not tolerate. Harry flinched slightly. I see. For just a moment, the grid's full attention was on Harry, only increasing his feeling of helplessness before, just as quickly, it was gone again. Yes, I think that you just might in any case, no matter how this battle goes, I intend to aid Zordon in his attempted rescue of the trapped citizens of Angel Grove. They are under my protection and I failed them, so it's only right that I help rectify the situation. Any response Harry might have made was preluded by an approaching presence. It took Harry only a moment to identify it as Zordon, which brought a sense of relief to him that made the grid chuckle again. He really needed to ask Zordon about protecting his thoughts using whatever technique had been developed in this dimension. Occlumency wasn't even remotely effective. I'll keep that in mind, Harry. Zordon said as his presence drew up alongside Harry's, giving the Magi Ranger an anchor to further settle him in the immensity of the morphing grid. Perhaps we can address that once the present conflict is settled. Harry merely gave an affirmative, knowing that both beings would register it no matter what he did. After a moment more, Zordon spoke again. Come then, Harry. It's time to put the next phase of the plan into action. With another mental affirmative, Harry grasped onto Zordon's presence and let him lead/pull him wherever was needed. It was only on the edge of his perception that he heard the grid's last words. Good luck to you, Harry Potter. I have been working HRD on more aspects of your branch of the power since we first met and am most excited to see it in action. I hope you won't keep me waiting too long. There wasn't really any sense of time, distance, or speed to be had in the grid this time around. When he had come in search of Zordon, Harry had been disassociated with the grid itself, but having the connection he now did made much of the discomfort he had experienced lessen to the point he didn't really notice it. So it was an indeterminate time later that Harry found himself in an area that felt of his mentor, and there before him were 6 balls of light, black, pink, blue, yellow, red, and green. Furthermore, each of the lights gave off a slight feeling of his friends when he focused on them in turn. Zack, playful and fun-loving, but serious when called for. Kimberly, loyal almost to a fault and protective of those close to her, but willing to give anyone a chance. Billy, intelligent and introverted, but coming out of his shell with the help of his friends. Trini, kind, helpful and willing to do anything and everything to help those in need. Jason, focused on his goal with an intensity rarely seen and protective of his friends and teammates. Tommy, determined, willing to put his own life on the line to protect those close to him, yet tinged with a hint of darkness from his time under Rita's control. A hint that fueled his determination that much further in an attempt to make up for what he sees as his shortcomings. Harry snapped back to himself when Zordon gave him a mental poke. This, Harry, is what you could call my own corner of the grid. It is where my accumulated power has gathered together, which is why these lights are here. They represent my creation of the mighty Morphin branch of the power and resonate with the essence of all those who have used it, including the current Ranger team. This is the sum of all my studies into the grid and the power. In time and with practice, you too shall have a similar place. Harry reached out with his mind, attempting to take in the scope of the area, but found himself unable to comprehend it all. Whoa, I guess you collect a lot of power in 10,000 years, huh? Zordon chuckled. Yes, Harry. I believe that I can safely say that I am one of the most powerful light-sided grid magic users, if not the most powerful. Alas, while I am trapped in the time warp I am largely unable to make use of it, and if I were to leave somehow, I would likely age at a highly accelerated rate until death. Harry winced. That was quite the conundrum. Zordon had all this power that Harry could literally not sense the end to, and he was almost completely unable to make use of it without risking his own life. If there is even a way to break him out of the time warp prison in the first place. Unfortunately, Harry, we don't have time to waste pondering what-ifs. The Rangers are awaiting my signal to morph into battle, and we don't have much time left before Cyclopsis becomes active again. Harry shook himself briefly, refocusing his mind on what needed to be done. All right, Zordon, how are we going to do this? Zordon's presence emitted a feeling of satisfaction. It is rather simple at this point, Harry. All you need to do is grasp the power for the Red Ranger much as you did the power within you. Anchor yourself to it, but be careful not to let yourself be absorbed into it. You are separate from the power, but will give of yourself to enhance it. Then, you will merely have to wait until the Rangers morph. Harry blinked, momentarily overwhelmed by the situation. He had to hold on to it, but not let it absorb him? Was the power going to try and pull him into it? Would he end up stuck as part of Jason's morph? A second consciousness that could only outwardly express itself when Jason was in suit? That might interfere with his relationship with Trini if it happened. Zordon let out a burst of laughter that snapped Harry out of his musings. No, Harry, the power is not going to actively try to absorb you. I was merely cautioning you against merging yourself with it unintentionally. If such a thing were to happen, it would be purely of your own doing, especially since the only consciousness currently behind the Red Ranger is Jason's and the two of you haven't always been on the best of terms. I doubt he would want any kind of merging any more than you would. Harry blushed as Zordon's laughter continued, but moved himself forward all the same. Drawing closer to the red power, Harry reached out and touched it, feeling that same Jasonness even stronger as he did so. Zordon gave off a feeling of approval before speaking. Good, Harry. I must go now, but I suspect the call will be made shortly. Remember, trust in yourself and the other Rangers and you cannot fail. And then Zordon's presence was gone and Harry was alone. He almost started to panic, but found himself settling slightly because, while his mind was gone, Zordon's essence was spread throughout the entire area around him. Harry was literally floating at the center of Zordon's power, and that though coupled with the feeling of his friends still emanating from the colored motes of power let him relax enough that it seemed that almost no time had passed before he heard Jason's voice echo around him. It's morphin' time. It was time to go to work. It started with a tug. The slight pulling sensation was coming from the red ball of power Harry was touching, but that's all it was. Harry wasn't actively fighting to remain within the grid and the sensation didn't seem to stutter or anything, so he wasn't too worried. Then the black light visibly shrunk, pulling in on itself until it went from a globe that was, metaphorically, similar in size to Harry to the barest mode of light. Moments after that, the pink light did the same, followed by blue and yellow. Then the red light contracted and Harry felt like he was being pulled through a small tube, a sensation not unlike apparition, until he snapped back to awareness to find himself in Angel Grove Park. Whoa! Zach's voice allowed Harry to reorient himself. He found himself floating, still feeling as his pure consciousness did in the grid. Harry spun and caught sight of the suited black and blue Rangers standing a few feet from where Harry was floating and a few feet down, telling him that he was floating over the Rangers' heads. Yeah, that's a nice look on you, Jason. Harry turned the other direction to see Kimberly, who had spoken, with Trini next to her and Tommy beyond them. Though I think Trini may say she prefers it on Harry. Kimberly idly jabbed at Trini with her elbow only to receive a playful slap on the shoulder from the Yellow Ranger. What are you guys talking about? Jason asked, prompting Harry to look down, discovering that he was hovering above and slightly behind the Red Ranger. The Red Ranger, who was currently sporting the same silvery white vest/cloak garment that Harry himself wore while morphed into the Magi Ranger, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows standing out proudly on the back, a clear indicator. Finally, the Red Ranger noticed a bit of unexpected white out of the corner of his eye and realized what he was wearing. What the how did I get Harry's cloak? It's probably a side effect of Harry boosting your power right now, Tommy mused. Billy nodded his agreement. Affirmative, that is a rather likely hypothesis. Still a bit disturbing though, Harry said. He was caught completely off guard when Jason nearly jumped out of his skin. Harry, the Red Ranger asked, glancing this way and that as if expecting to see the wizard. A Jason? Zach asked, taking a step closer to his friend. What are you looking for? Harry's back at the command center, remember? But I heard, Jason said, still sounding somewhat off. So they can't hear me, but you can since I'm connected to your power at the moment. That would have been good to know beforehand. Jason groaned. Seriously, Harry? Well, try not to distract me when we start fighting. That would probably turn out badly for both of us. Jason, Zach said, speaking slower now. Why are you holding a one-sided conversation with someone that we all know isn't here? Jason nearly growled in frustration before turning to Zach. Harry is here too, just not visibly. He said only I can hear him because he's connected to my morph. That's probably also why I have his cloak on. Zach seemed unable to formulate an answer, but it turned out to be a moot point because in the blink of an eye the Rangers were surrounded by putties. Jason didn't waste a moment. All right, Rangers. This is the beginning of the toughest battle we've fought yet and these putties are the first step in winning. Let's take these clay-faced freaks down. Right. And then the battle was on. From the perspective of an observer, Harry was able to appreciate that Jason was an incredible fighter. He would have to be in order for him to be allowed to teach a karate class at his age, but Harry had never really been able to notice it in their previous battles. Any other time, Harry had been more worried about fighting his own allotment of putties or avoiding Golder or the monster of the week to really notice too much of what the others were doing. Unless they were saving his backside, that is, but he tried not to think about that part too much. Jason, with his invisible tag-along, charged into the horde of putties, leading off with a full force punch with all his momentum behind it that laid out the target. He then moved fluidly into a spinning kick, catching another construct as it approached from the side. All in all, Jason's fighting style was strong, straightforward, and ruthless. More than once, Jason took a hit in order to catch the fist, foot, or weapon appendage of a putty so he could then deliver several devastating blows while it was trapped. The trick was, it wasn't a way Harry was comfortable fighting. With all the practice Harry did back in his world learning to dodge spells, taking hits like Jason did in order to deliver his own was practically anathema to him, and that was only one example. The biggest thing it came down to was that Harry just didn't have the same stocky build as Jason, so fighting like that didn't work for him. To be honest, it was quite likely another reason that Harry didn't really learn as much from Jason as he had from Tommy since quitting Jason's class. Simply put, although Tommy's style of fighting was admittedly more flamboyant than Harry was comfortable with, his tendency to dodge and counterattack rather than take the hit, the sheer amount of movement that he did just suited Harry better. Of course, the fact that Tommy didn't have a grudge against Harry like Jason certainly helped too. The group of putty patrollers that the Rangers was facing was likely the same large group that had assisted in kidnapping Tommy and had nearly caught the Rangers before Harry's portkey whisked them away. The big differences between now and their two previous encounters was that the Rangers were prepared for battle and were already in morph. The battle was practically over before Harry really had time to get bored with floating overhead, unable to do anything to help and too afraid of distracting Jason to really say anything. It wasn't more than a few seconds after the last putty vanished that Golder's voice roared out, amplified by the systems of his war Zord to a volume usually only reached when the monster had been grown. "Rangers. It was nice of you to join us, but you're too late. Cyclopsis is active again and now you're doomed." From among the buildings of Angel Grove, Harry caught sight of the towering form of Cyclopsis. As he watched, its eyes lit up with a brief pulse of electric blue light before it turned to face the Rangers directly and moved to make its way out of the maze of buildings. Jason turned to the other Rangers. "All right, Rangers, let's let Cyclopsis get out of the city before we call in the Zords." For once, the Red Ranger was speaking at a quieter volume than normal, presumably to avoid detection by Cyclopsis. "Good idea, Jason," Kimberly said with a nod. "Agreed," Billy was quick to follow with a nod of his own. "We need to prevent excessive damage to the city as much as possible." The others gave a round of nods before Jason shifted a bit uneasily and spoke again. Harry, the Ranger, was clearly uncomfortable with speaking with someone he couldn't see, yet knew was there. "Keep an eye on Cyclopsis. We may need to teleport if it starts getting too close to us." Harry nodded briefly before remembering that nobody could see him. "Can do, Jason. You guys might want to get moving though." Jason only nodded before signaling the other Rangers into a mad dash for the uninhabited land that started on the outskirts of the park and continued on to the horizon. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 12. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and 10-star 12 on FANFICTION.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.